Participatory. Good morning, everybody.
Good
How
morning, Nick.
is that heaven? Oh, this sounds way different.
It is me. Good morning.
Well, I just want to say welcome. This is our annual regional LID training. I'm Nick Sedano from the city of Santa Rosa, and along with my colleagues up here in the front, with the exception of the two regional water board members, we manage the stormwater permits for each of our respective municipalities. This is the 15th training. So probably the 15th annual LID training, whether you knew that or not, but the manual's been around that long, which is hard to think of. Is that something, you want to click that, Aaron? I can't, there we go. So I wanted to let you know that this training is specific to Region 1 and to the 10 co-permittees that are on the Phase 1 MS4 permit. And that's the city of Cloverdale, city of Cotati, city of Healdsburg, city of Roanoke Park, Santa Rosa, Sebastopol, Sonoma Water, who doesn't do LID but supports us with LID, and we really appreciate them for that. But LID impacts the work that they do in the watershed. And city of Ukiah, Windsor, and the county of Sonoma. So what you're going to hear in these presentations is consistent among the 10 municipalities that are listed up here. And there potentially is going to be some differences from municipalities. We do have an option to be more stringent in the way that we implement LAD in our communities. But we all have a consistent baseline, which is our stormwater MS4 permit. So today we're going to do we're going to go over some acronyms and definitions just to make sure everybody's on the same page. We work in this every day, but sometimes we take that for granted. And so we want to make sure that you understand what we're saying. What I will tell you, though, is that if you hear an acronym that we throw out, will you please just raise your hand, because there's probably someone else either online or here in person that doesn't understand that. And we want everybody to be clear what we're talking about. We're going to have just a brief intro from the regional board about the requirements of LID that are driven by the EPA and the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. We're going to talk a little bit about the stormwater calculator. And the calculator is about to be updated as soon as we get a new MS4 permit, which is anticipated here in spring of 2025. But that's subject to delay, and it's also subject to being pushed up. But we wanted to hear from a design perspective of how that calculator is being used and some of the common issues and some of the things that you're getting from the review standpoint. And so this is your opportunity to kind of get that flag going, because we want you guys to start discussing this towards the end of our conversations today so that we can make this better and we can work with the regional board to get those requirements or those provisions into our permit to help you and support you going forward in the design of the LID features. We'll have a case study about lessons learned of what we see in the field for what's going right and what's going wrong for LID installation. So if your project's in there, I apologize, it wasn't intentional, but we want to show you what we see from a municipality standpoint after you guys walk away from a job. We're going to talk about stormwater submittals and what is needed and where we'd like to potentially go from there. And then we're going to hear again from a design firm about some constraints and some of the challenges that they have working within the confinements of our LID requirements. And again, that's meant so we can have an open, productive dialogue, but we really want you guys to engage in the dialogue. That is the important piece. We'll talk about some frequently asked questions that we get in office hours or that the regional board gets in office hours quite a bit, and so we can get some clarifications here. We are working on potentially getting some FAQs published. It's more of a lengthy process than you realize, but at minimum, the FAQs will eventually go into the new manuals as soon as we publish that in the new permit cycle. And then we'll have an open Q&A with the regional board, so you guys can ask questions, you guys can ask or discuss potential changes that might help you going forward. And really the big piece here that I want you to take away is that together with the regional board, who is our regulator, the municipalities who implement that regulation, and the design and the construction and the landscape firms in the room of who's implementing that, we're stronger together, collaborating together towards this common goal is going to be more productive for us in the long run. So it'll help us with the development, but it'll also help us with the environmental benefit. And if we can come to solutions together, I think we're going to be stronger together. And I hope that's what you take from this today. So we're going to plan some presentations in here that are probably going to maybe elicit some reaction from you, and that's intentional. And so when you get to the Q&A, we want to talk about that and talk about potential solutions going forward that we can think about. And then we're going to hear from the board about future updates that they want to see and where the next permit's going, and then we'll adjourn from there. So I do want to just say, take a second if you're here in the room to mute your phones so we don't interrupt the speakers. Emergency exits obviously are straight in the back here. Bathrooms are to the left. And if you have a question, we're going to ask you to come up to the podium to ask your question and to turn the mic on. If you don't talk in the mic, the people online cannot hear you. And so we want to make sure everybody can hear the question to do that. So, and then are you starting? You've recorded. So we're good on that front. And then the last little bit is there's a survey on your chairs. And for those of you online, there's going to be a survey sent following this presentation. And what we want you to do is please take the time to fill it out. We actually use these surveys every year to develop the training for the next year. And we do actually come back into these and we really try to gear that training or those topics around what you guys put into these surveys. So we put it on your chair now so you can fill it out as you're thinking about it or as that question comes up during presentations. Or if you need more time to think about it, you can take it with you and we'll send one to you online to complete. So with that said, I will turn that over now to our first presenter. Oh, wait, sorry. They gave me the microphone, so I get to torture you a little bit. Again, I said this is active participation. And, you know, sorry, I just like that slide. I like Wallace and Gromit. So I'm going to ask a question, and you're going to have to answer it. So what's required for the overlap, fastening, and methodology for two separate pieces of 10 mil plastic moisture barrier required for one continuous section within a bioretention feature? What's that detail look like? What's the requirement in the manual? And it's a crickets. You guys are the experts, and you can't answer this? Anybody? What kind of tape? It needs to be waterproof and watertight. The LID manual doesn't specify how you do it. There's no detail in it. And this is something that all the designers in this room are missing that we're seeing in the field. Stego tape works fantastic, Zach. So I appreciate you bringing that up. We've also seen some designers say to provide a minimum overlap for those two pieces. So I'm going to tease you all day with questions like this. These are questions that are going to come into your FAQ. These are questions that we're going to develop the next manual around. So I encourage you to try to answer the questions because these are common things that we're seeing out in the field as we're looking at these. But because Zach participated and because this is an LID training, now I'll turn it over to Sean Paul from the regional board. Oh, Scott Sanders, sorry, from Roner Park.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, for coming, taking the time to join us here. I am Scott Sanders. I'm the Environmental and Sustainabilities Manager at the City of Roner Park, and I'm here to go over the abbreviations and acronyms that you might hear today. First, I'll give a little definition. Abbreviation is when you just kind of say BMP. That's an abbreviation. An acronym is when you actually can say the word. SWIP is an acronym, okay? So BMP individually. So I'm going to kind of gear this as like a big road trip we're all going to go on through acronyms and abbreviations, and it should be entertaining. Wrong way. All right, and before every great journey, we're going to pack some essentials, right? So let's get that suitcase open and start packing our essentials. Our first one today, LID, Low impact development. That is like my favorite shirt. It goes in my suitcase. Okay, what's our next one? We got BMP, best management practices, favorite pants. Put them in my suitcase. You put those together, you have a low impact development, best management practice. That's your swales. That's all your stuff to stay in compliance. Our next one, we have our MS4 municipal separate storm sewer system. This one's a little tricky sometimes. It gets a little confusing, but it's my favorite shoe, so it goes in the suitcase as well. And then our last essential item, NPDES, and National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. That is also my favorite, so it goes in the suitcase. All right, let's close our suitcase up. And now that we're packed, it's time that we map out our journey here. Let's get our state of California. We're starting here down in the bottom. What do we have? We have APN, your assessor's parcel number. This is, you're going to see this everywhere. Let's start our journey. The next one, I already said this one, SWIP, Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. It's not SWIP-B, okay, everyone, it's just SWIP. That's our standard. Next, we have our, this is a tough one. It could be SWID lids, SW lids, stormwater lids. This is your stormwater low impact development submittal. Our next one, we have our SWMP, your stormwater mitigation plan. And then after that, we have your SUSMP, your standard urban stormwater mitigation plan. These last three are, I'm not going to say they're the same, but they could be used interchangeably. They're all trying to tell you what you need to do to be in compliance. And then our journey is going. Usually through my journey, I get my first question. Are we there yet? Not yet. Okay, sorry, kids. And then a little bit later, I usually get, how much longer? I'm like, I don't know. I don't really know where I'm going. So then I get, are you lost? And usually the answer is yes, I am lost. So let's go ask for some directions. Here we go. First person I'm going to ask is our EOR. Who is that? That's our engineer of record. That's a good person to know, so let's put him in the car. Okay. And then you have your DCIA, directly connected impervious areas. You have your WDRs, your waste discharge requirements. Now that we know where we're going, let's continue our journey. I'm going to do a nice hike, but looks like there's some storm clouds out there. What do we got? NOAA, your National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. That's a good place to get your weather. You have your CCNRs, conditions, covenants, and restrictions. Your maintenance declarations hide in these documents. You have your FDR, your full depth reclamation. That's always a good one to know. And now that we finished that little hike, we made it all the way back to Sonoma County. Here we go. Let's get a little couple tour guides. You got your US EPA, your United States Environmental Protection Agency. Great tour guide to know. You have your SWRCB, your State Water Resources Control Board. And then over here, we have a pretty tough acronym if anyone wants to try it. No, it's an abbreviation. You're right. It's NCRWQCB, your North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. There they are right here. And, and then you have us co-permittees. That's kind of just talking about us co-permittees, your Healdsburgs, your City of Rohnert Parks. That's us. And then our road trip is over. I hope you enjoyed it, but guess what? The journey has just begun. Everyone sit back and let's enjoy it. Thank you.
Good. Clicker, clicker, clicker. So I wanted to bring up Sean Paul Berube from the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. Sean Paul manages our stormwater NPDES permit. But before I get into that, Sean Paul is kind of going to go into why these regulations and what drives these regulations. But what I put up on the screen here is our MS4 permit, which has LID requirements. And by extension, it required us to create an LID manual, which you guys are designing to, which is an extension of the permit. These are one and the same now because it's been approved by the executive officer of the regional board. And then it gets really confusing because then the regional board also conditions projects from 401 and also from CGP. But every time you guys complete a CGP project and submit your notice of termination, you get two questions on here that are related to LID, and that's where WALT comes in. And that's where some of that consternation is starting to come in because the board is starting to look at this a little bit more than they have in the past. But that requirement has always been there for you to comply with. So I'm going to bring that up, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sean Paul, and you can talk about that more.
All right, good morning, everybody. I was told I have 10 minutes and I have 140 slides, so I'll try and go quick. Sorry, I'm at 14. All right, so low impact development requirements. Well, as Nick said, I'm Sean Paul Berube, the Municipal Stormwater Coordinator for the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. And if we ask ourselves why we're here today, hopefully one of the reasons is because clean water is important to us. And hence, managing stormwater is important if we want clean water. So let's look at a few examples of what can happen when we don't manage stormwater properly. And as we look at these slides, I just want to point out that stormwater is often considered a nuisance because it mobilizes pollutants like sediment, motor oil, and trash, and often directs them directly into our storm drains, which then discharges into our local creeks, rivers, and streams. So these are just a few examples you can see when stormwater isn't managed properly. All right, so what's the goal of this presentation? Well, it's to learn about MS4 permits and low impact developments and how they're part of the solution for preventing problems like we just saw. We're going to talk about key requirements today, how the LID manual helps meet these requirements, and why the manual is crucial for supporting stormwater management in our region. Okay, I'm going to break this presentation down into two parts. I'm going to talk about the MS4 permit requirements briefly, and then I'm going to talk about the LID manual, specifically the authority, the authorization, the regional requirements, and the applicable regional geographic area. And I just want to point out, as Nick did, the MS4 permit and the LID manual go hand in hand. They're basically, the LID manual is basically an extension of the MS4 permit. Okay, so what is the MS4 permit? And before we jump into this, I just want to point out that our sewer system is separate than our storm drain system. So any waste that comes from your house, be it your shower, toilet, your sink, that's going to go to the sanitary sewer system versus the water that falls from the sky that runs off your car when you're washing it or when you're watering in your lawn. If that goes to our streets and into the drain, it goes into our local waterways. All right, and then as mentioned before, MS4 permit stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And yeah, there you go. And basically, the MS4 permit is the backbone of stormwater management under the NPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Program. All right. So what are the MS4 requirements? Well, the MS4 permit sets rules for municipalities to manage stormwater in a manner that prevents pollution from reaching creeks, rivers, lakes, while reducing hydromodification. Specific requirements include SWIPs and BMPs, and these plans outline steps to control runoff. Think of it as a rule book for keeping stormwater as clean as possible before it flows into our natural waterways. All right, now let's jump into the LID manual, the authority. So why does this manual matter? It's not just a guide, it's rooted in federal and state law. Think of the EPA's Clean Water Act as the source of authority implemented regionally by the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. And so if the MS4 permit is the what you need to do, the LID manual is how to do it. And lastly, I just want to point out that these are minimum standards. Okay, if we look into LID manual authorization, we're going to see that LID features are a way to mimic nature. So before we had all these impervious surfaces, water would fall from the sky, it would hit the ground, it would infiltrate to the ground. Then when the ground became saturated, it would run off into our local streams and creeks. And LID is a man-made way to mimic nature. Think of features like rain gardens, green roofs, and bioretentions as man-made features that mimic the natural process. And these requirements aren't just suggestions. They're essential for meeting specific regional water quality standards while addressing pollutants like total suspended solids, total phosphorus, and total nitrogen. All right, regulatory requirements. Oh, sorry, the last slide, I forgot to mention that to ensure compliance, regular inspections and annual reports are completed with penalties being levied as needed. All right. So, general requirements. So this manual tailors requirements to specific regions considering climate, watershed, and urban development. Wait, did I miss a slide? Oh, yeah, sorry. I skipped the slide there. So anyway, moving on here. That's what happens when you don't get any sleep in your hotel room. All right, so applicable regional geographic area. Okay, so this manual tailors the requirements to specific regions, which considers climate, watershed, and urban development. In our region, we're focused on protecting areas like sensitive wetlands, groundwater recharge zones, the California tiger salamander, and our high quality water. Lastly, I just want to point out there are differences in requirements based on your municipality and who you're working with. Cities and developers and regulators all must work together to ensure that this process happens. All right, so in conclusion, beyond just LID regulations, what are some benefits? Well, there's environmental benefits. There's benefits to the community, making it look better, improving our shared spaces, and there's benefits to our infrastructure. All right, so again, I apologize for messing up there on my slides, but thank you. Hopefully you don't have any questions. And again, thank you. I apologize for skipping over that slide there, but I'll be around later if you have any questions.
All right, so now we want to hear from a design firm on the use of the calculator. So Zach Ruiz from Adobe Associates is going to come up and present. But before he does that, it's participation time because you guys are getting sleepy. Sorry, come on, keep coming up, Zach. So can the K factor be considered a constant value such as 1 inch of rain everywhere, considering the definition for hydromodification controls state 1 inch? Come on, somebody. I'm asking a question. It's a yes or no answer. Why not? That's correct. So seasonal precipitation factor based on historical rainfall data needs to come from the Sonoma Water Flood Management Design Manual. That's a requirement in the LID manual. So that is the correct answer. And for that, you win a coffee cup.
So just go up and down. Okay. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Hi, everybody. My name is Zach Ruiz. I work at Adobe Associates. I've been with them for about 8 years now. And I'm going to talk to you about the Santa Rosa LID calculator. I'm not going to focus so much on how to use it, but more so the equations behind the equations that they use to calculate your runoff and volume and treatment. Okay, maybe I'll do this. Is that better? Does go up? Yeah, there. Oh, perfect. Okay, is that better? Okay. So again, I'm going to go over more of the calculations behind the calculator and how those are used and how, depending on the values you decide to use, how that affects the total volume and treatment calculations. Next slide. Okay, so the Santa Rosa LID calculator uses the TR55 manual, which is a USDA manual for small urban or for small watersheds. I'm going to talk about the Santa Rosa LID calculator inputs, the 100% hydro modification versus the delta volume calculations, runoff reduction measures, treatment calculations, and then how the curve number affects runoff. And I'm going to show you that through examples. And then I'm going to go through some common mistakes, errors, and omissions, and then LID calculator updates that that we've thought about at our firm on how the calculator can be improved. So if you're not familiar, the USDA has the TR55 manual for urban hydrology for small watersheds, and that's where the curve number and volume calculations come from. And the Santa Rosa LID calculator uses equations 2-3 and 2-4 to determine the runoff in inches. To calculate volume, it takes your runoff in inches, which they use Q, which is confusing from the rational method, and they convert it to volume by your total drainage area for that particular BMP or drainage management area. And then the additional thing is the K value that Nick just brought up, which is the mean seasonal precipitation, to either increase or decrease that volume based on how much average annual rainfall you get. Excuse me? It doesn't use the rational method. The Q from no, so the rational method is for designing the peak flow in cubic feet per second. The TR55 manual uses the same Q, but it's in runoff for inches, and then to get the volume, you multiply it by your square footage. And I have the equations shown. So here's the calculations for the 100% treatment, and that the button I have circled is where you can click on it and you can see where these equations came from right in the spreadsheet calculator. And so once you click on the equations, the two equations initially are the S equals 1,000 over the curve number minus 10. So that's TR55 equation 2.4. And then to get the runoff in inches is this longer equation. And the difference in this one is that it does have those K values, which again increases or decreases based on your annual precipitation. So when you click on this, if you've already had your inputs, it shows you the intermediate calculations down below. Down below. So it has your S values, your Q, and then your total volume. And so as you're going through it, you can see if those calculations are correct, and you can double check based on if you've created your own spreadsheet for those. But the calculations are there. The next is the delta volume calculation, and the difference between this one is that it takes your pre-construction curve number and it subtracts it from your post-construction curve number, and you're allowed to use the delta volume when your impervious area is under 1 acre, and the calculator helps you determine that on the first sheet. I don't have a slide for that, I apologize. But again, you can click on the display delta volume calculations. Once you have your inputs, it'll show you the calculations that you have. I don't have a slide for that because it's the same as the 100% modification. It just has the two calculations for your pre-construction and your post-construction. Next we have the runoff reduction measures, and I've added notes in yellow. So when you add interceptor trees for your post-construction, for evergreens, it removes 200 square feet from your final design calculation. So if you're starting with 10,000 square feet and you have 10 trees, let's say, so it'll only calculate your volume based on 8,000 square feet. So that's a way to reduce the total volume in your calculations. Same thing with the deciduous trees. It reduces it by 100 square feet, and that's based off of the landscape plan that needs to be provided with your construction documents and Swillard's report. For rooftops disconnected, you get a full area reduction, and then for the rooftop area disconnected from your downspouts, you get the units per acre. Or sorry, this is a full area reduction as well. And then the buffer strips is a 70% reduction. So by adding up all of these, you can reduce your total calculated area for your drainage area. So that reduces the required volume and potentially square footage of your bioretention area. So one thing that we do for these runoff reduction measures is during the preliminary design, we generally don't add those because sites change, landscaping plans change, they're not fully developed. We usually leave those off until the permitting phase, because that one allows us to size our areas without those, and then we utilize those at the end so that we can start reducing it towards the end versus having to go back and forth with the landscape architect and changing our design. So next, I'm going to talk about the treatment calculations. Again, you can see those calculations if you click on the display the 100% treatment calculations. One thing I want to note here is that the C values for the treatment calculations in the LID manual are not the same as the C values you would use for the rational method, because these are designed for a smaller storm. And so as you can see, like the concrete and asphalt, generally for the rational method, you'd use 0.9 for both of those. But in table 6.1 in the, I think it's the additional resources, the reference documents, you can use a reduced curve number, which again reduces the total flow rate and potentially size of length of a swale or size of a vertical flow planter box. And there's a link to the additional resources down below. So there's two treatment calculations, and the treatment calculations are required if you don't have to do any volume capture. You still have to provide treatment calculations, whether that's through a vegetated swale or vertical flow planter box. And you also have to provide treatment calculations for the delta volume capture, because the delta volume versus the 100% volume capture, it doesn't account for the total treatment. So you have to do the delta volume, and additionally, you have to do a separate 100% treatment calculation. And so this is the calculation for this is for the flow rate. So this is how you get your Q value, which is your cubic feet per second. The treatment factor is calculated, or is an automatic calculation through the calculator. And again, the C value for this one is from table 6.1 of the reference documents. So here's the treatment calculation for the horizontal flows in a swale. Inputs are the side slopes, the length, the swale bed width, your percent slope. Manning's roughness is based on the type of grasses you choose. Grass height, you kind of have to work with the landscape architect to determine that. And then your final input is your design swale length to calculate how long your swale has to be based on your initial flow rates to get that contact time for treatment. And then, the one below is the vertical box, 100% treatment, so planter boxes. And in the next slide, I have a detail that shows. So this is a similar to, it's your square footage based, and so essentially you're ponding in a basin, and it's flowing through down into either a perf pipe below, or it fills up and flows into an outflow box. I have a detail here that shows how this is from one of our projects that had a delta volume capture requirement, and the treatment calculation, the area that we designed for the bioretention wasn't big enough to have all the treatment accounted for above the underground volume. And so what we did is we've extended it, and we've extended that area. It's 18 inches or 1.5 feet outside of the volume capture below. And so here's a slide just showing like a quick comparative. Go ahead. So, okay, so the question is do we account for groundwater depth? So that was for the treatment. Yeah, so okay. So to reiterate, the delta volume that was required for this project, the area above that. So in this slide, we have the rock chamber below, and for 100% hydromodification, the area above accounts for the 100% treatment, but in delta volume, it only accounts for the volume, and you have to do the treatment calculations to determine how big your area is. So in this case, for this detail, um, we extended the vegetated area and planting to account for the 100% vertical flow in a planter box. So essentially, this will flow through it, and then there's a perf pipe. So that's where the 100% treatment is coming in. And then you'll have to differentiate that on your plans, showing a smaller area for the underground rock chamber, and then the additional area for planting to provide the 100% treatment. Okay.
Chat in the online, we can't hear, so please,
Yeah,
thank you.
I did. All right, so this is from Jeffrey Ayton. Sorry if I,
Hinton?
Ayton,
Hinton?
Ayton.
Okay. I don't know.
His question is, what rain event sets the delta volume?
So it's the same rain event for all the calculations. It's the 85 percentile 1-inch storm
Okay,
over a 24-hour period.
okay,
So-
and then, oh, go ahead.
So
sorry.
to add to that, for the 100% volume calculation, you have to capture 100% of your runoff from your area when it's over an acre. For the delta volume calculation, you can reduce the volume based on your pre-construction curve number, post-construction curve number. And I have an example of that I'm going to get to.
Okay, and then Steve Snow just said, and Steve Snow's with Permit Sonoma, the LID design storm is 1 inch in 24 hours.
Yes.
And then we got another question from Jeffrey. Is this for treatment and hydro modification?
So the hydro modification, it's the 100% hydro modification. And when you do that calculation, the area and volume that you calculate in that one, which I can go back to. No, yeah. One more. So when you're using the 100% hydro modification, the treatment and volume are accounted for in this one calculation. When you do the delta volume calculation, you have to use this calculator, this one, the delta volume calculator, where you put in your pre-construction and post-construction. And then additionally, so if you have, let's say it's called drainage area 1, DA1, you have to have a delta volume DA1 input in the calculator, and you have to have a delta, or you have to have a DA1 treatment calculation. So you have to provide two calculations when you're doing the delta volume, one for volume and one for treatment.
Okay, and there was okay, so Jeffrey has a follow-up. This is from the question, what rain event sets the delta volume? His follow-up is, what is the storm event for hydro modification?
So it's the same for both calculations.
Okay,
So it's the 24-hour 1-inch storm that Steve Snow just mentioned.
just mentioned, okay. And I believe he said thumbs up, so I
Okay.
think that's it.
So yeah, so just to kind of conclude that, the delta volume calculation, it takes your pre-construction curve number, determines the volume based on that 1-inch 24-hour storm, and then it subtracts that from your post-construction volume, 24-hour 1-inch storm. Okay, so here's a quick bullet point difference between the two. 100% volume capture is for impervious areas over 1 acre, not your drainage area. And that's for the whole project, not your individual drainage area that goes to the BMP. It only uses the post-construction curve number to calculate volume. You can avoid the 100% capture by reducing your impervious area. So if you're close to an acre, maybe you can work with the architect and put in pervious pavers or maybe gravel instead of concrete paths. And then treatment is achieved through the 100% volume capture calculations. In delta volume, that's for when you have impervious areas under 1 acre. It reduces your post-construction runoff by subtracting the pre-construction runoff, which we were just discussing. And it also requires you to do the 100% treatment calculations. So again, that's 2 separate inputs for each sub-drainage area in your BMP plan. You got to push the button, I think.
All right, I'm sorry if this is a stupid question, but if I'm wondering, there might be other people. So you showed us an example in which the 100% volume capture calculation accounted for everything. And then when you did the delta volume capture calculation, you needed to add more plants to make it work. But yes.
Yes.
But when you're comparing the 2 calculations, the 100% calculation uses the total outflow of the project, whereas the delta volume calculation subtracts what the flow already was before the project. Why isn't that smaller?
So you're asking about the treatment calculation? You
Yes.
still have to provide the 100% treatment calculations. So in Sonoma County, that's outside of the MS4 permit. There's some times where we can get the pre and post curve number to match, and so we don't have to provide volume for that drainage area, but we still have to provide 100% treatment. So just because they gave us a reduction in the volume, they still want 100% treatment for water quality. Okay, and so I have some examples. This first example is the 100% volume capture using the drop-down menu. So in the initial slide for the 100%, you can choose the various impervious areas, residential areas, trees, brush. And so I just picked, the most common for urban areas. And so here you can see the difference between if you just use the drop-down menu and you didn't use a weighted curve number, how those curve numbers affect the total volume that you have to treat. So generally for a subdivision, those lots are 1/8 acre. And so if you're just doing a subdivision, every lot is on average 1/8 of an acre. If you just picked the impervious paved area to make it easy, your curve number is 98, when you should have probably picked the residential 1/8 acre for townhouses and subdivisions. So that reduces your volume by 53% but just by changing that one input. And then these other ones, residential 1/4 acre versus the 1/8 acre, is another 50% reduction with a curve number difference of 7. And then again, down to a 1/2 acre site, it reduces it from the 1/4 acre site by 30%. So this is just an example of showing how the curve number affects the final volume for your BMP. Here's another example that's where I just reduced the impervious area from 100% down to 90, 80, and 70. And so that reduced the curve numbers by 2 on each of those. And so by decreasing the impervious area by 10%, you're getting approximately 17% reduction in volume that's required for your BMP. So if you have a large area, that could be pretty significant impact to the final cost and design of your project. Okay. And then here's an example of 100% volume capture versus delta. or I guess this is basically the delta volume capture. So I use the drop-down menu for impervious, 1/8 acre, quarter acre, and half acre. And so the first two columns are your post-construction curve number and your post-construction volume. And then your pre-construction volume based on the assumptions above. I use the pre-construction as brush with less than 50% cover, which gave me a curve number of 77. So in these four scenarios, I reduced the pre-construction volume by the post-construction volume. And so that's how the delta volume reduces the total volume at the end of a project. For all the examples I didn't mention, I did use 1 acre drainage area, even though delta volume doesn't, if it's 1 acre of impervious, you can use delta volume, but I just wanted to keep all the examples the same and consistent. In the MSP, I used a 36 with a K value of 1.2, and I did not use any runoff reduction measures.
Hey, Zach, I have a question up here.
Oh.
You keep referring to the 100% impervious, and I'm trying to make it clear, is that 100% of the new impervious, or is that the impervious area that is affected and replaced, or is it just any impervious area on your project?
I think it's it's the new or replaced impervious area. So if you have a 1 acre parking lot and you're going to put another 1 acre parking lot right next to it, then you would only have to account for the new impervious. Okay, so here, so this slide, we have some common mistakes, errors, and omissions. Drainage areas on your post-construction map in the report don't match the calculator. This is generally an oversight. You know, there's a lot of inputs in a lot of places where they want to see those area calculations or area values. So one thing that we've done to prevent that is we have a spreadsheet that's data referenced into AutoCAD. And so that we change the spreadsheet. Oh. Yes, sorry. And so we just have a spreadsheet where we keep all of our values for the, we also include the curve number, the area, what bioretention detail, and the required volume and the design volume. And so we update that spreadsheet in one location and it updates our AutoCAD automatically. Incorrect accounting of pre and post impervious areas. This has to do with when you're going through, sometimes you don't always have great mapping of a full site, so you don't know if that road's dirt, gravel, or asphalt, or maybe the path is pavers, and so you're calling it 98 when maybe they're pervious pavers, or vice versa. The runoff reduction measures don't match the civil or landscape plans. And this is what I mentioned with those runoff reduction measures, is that we usually wait until we're going in for permitting before we add those, because by that time, usually the site's a lot more developed and we're not going back and forth with the landscape architect if they change trees and we have to update our calculations and they might remove 5 that we didn't account for. And so we try to avoid that by leaving that towards the end. Delta volume calculations do not have accompanying treatment calculations, which is what we talked about, how when you do delta volume, you have to provide the volume calculation and a separate 100% treatment calculation. And if you use the weighted curve method, or curve number method, which I didn't go over in this presentation, those calculations are not provided in your report. So if you do decide to not use the dropdown and do a weighted curve number analysis, then you need to provide those calculations in your submittal. And then the last slide I have is for calculator updates that we would like to see is the delta volume and treatment calculations are in one calculation because it becomes cumbersome when you have to keep going into 2 different ones to change one value. Remove the MSP and K values from the calculator and use the NOAA Atlas 14 values, which is now what the standard FMDM flood management design manual from 2020 from Sonoma Water uses. So that way it's just more consistent between the two manuals. And then we've always had printing issues with the calculator. I see a couple of people shaking their heads. So that'd be nice if those could get fixed. And another thing that's come up recently is a lot of times, like you were saying with groundwater, we're constrained with size and groundwater depth. And so what we've come up with is either putting in a perf pipe instead of in the gravel section so that we have that 100% volume, or there's various other storm tech, basically a dome. And so we'd like the city and the water board and the different municipalities to be able to have a standard detail where we could use something like that. Kudo cubes is another one. There's various other products that we could use because a lot of times these bioretention areas have to fit into a 4-foot planter strip, and you have to be lower than the road subgrade. And if you have high groundwater, that doesn't give you much volume to treat, the additional 2 lanes or any runoff from the site. And so that's one of the things that we'd like to see in the update. And then my last slide is a couple pictures of some bioretention that were recently approved. And if you guys have any questions or comments.
Hey, I'll jump in here. I already know your issues with the printing, but we want to hear you guys synthesize what you want fixed with that. How difficult is it to print? Are you printing 1 page at a time? Like, what do you want modified?
I think I'll have to show you, but basically
You gotta speak in the mic.
we'll have to get on a call and I'll have to show you the issues. But a lot of times it gets, when you go to print 5 or 10 BMPs, sometimes the program gets stuck and you have to, if you're printing a PDF, you have to go change things, and it's a back and forth. It's hard to explain. I'll have to show you.
So if there's anybody else in the room that's having printing issues, those are great things to share with us. Because again, the idea is that when we update the calculator, we're going to go out to a consulting firm, and we want to be able to talk about all the current nuances, as well as add in some more transparency, which you guys have been asking for. All the calculations are in the manual. Zach has shown where some of these calculations are, but sometimes they're not that intuitive. And so whatever feedback we can get from you on the calculator, the easier we can make it for you once we go back to that redesign, once we're in that new manual. The other thing I would kind of throw out to the people in this room, including you, Zach, is what is your greatest frustration during the review process having to use our calculator? Because the manual specifically says you have to use our calculator. You cannot provide us your calculations. And there are some exceptions to that, but very rarely do we accept them. And so what are your frustrations with that? What do you want to see fixed with that? And how can we make it better with the calculator?
One of the issues that we've seen is for some of the larger projects, when you have 10, 15, 20 different BMPs, having to go, just the time consumption it takes to go through and change some of those inputs for each individual one becomes an issue. So what I've done and what we've done is we've created a spreadsheet that does all these calculations for us. So during the design process, when we're changing grades and areas, I change it in the spreadsheet. And then once we're ready to submit, then I go through and I'll input the individual 20 to 30 BMPs in the Santa Rosa calculator. But it's a lot easier for me to change them in my spreadsheet because it's all listed.
Kevin, do you have questions? Kevin, if you want to seat up here.
One problem that I face when printing the summary sheet from the calculator, if there's more than 30 BMPs, then the summary sheet won't print 31 and on. So the simple fix I've come up with is just make a second calculator sheet with the rest of the BMPs and just print it from there.
That's fantastic feedback. And by the way, You're going to hear it later, but we would love to not have 30 BMPs.
And that reminded me, there is in the delta volume capture, one of the calculations in the actual drainage area, the calculation is incorrect because it doesn't account for the calculation that's shown doesn't account for the porosity. So the value that it shows is significantly higher than what it is, but the actual 100% calculation.
So again, this is great feedback of what we're trying to get. Also on your survey forms in the very back, we are asking people who want to be part of development or review once we're in development, because we really want to do this side by side with you. We don't want to have to develop this and have you guys implement it and say it doesn't work or it's not right. And so if you're interested in participating in part of those review panels or development panels, when that time comes, again, that's where your survey and filling that out really would help us out.
Couple quick ones on the calculator. One on this may,
Closer to
You want to make sure you're,
oh, sorry. A couple quick things on the calculator. One, this may have already been addressed. I don't know. I've uploaded and still have the problem, but there's a round off error when you input a composite CN value. Whenever you go to calculate it and toggle back to it, it drops off a decimal up or down, and then it affects your total volume capture if you go through and redo it. The other thing is the wish list. You touched on having structures included in, and I know that whenever you input your volume capture requirements, if we could have some type of composite component to it where you have two different medias. So if you're using like a bioretention media versus a structural soil, or a structural soil comboed with a structure, just being able to put those together in the same calculator. We have a supplemental one that we typically include that shows the composite, and we put it back into the calculator and explain back and forth. But if we had it already included, that'd be great.
Okay, Zach, I have a couple, one's a comment from Flannery Banks.
Okay.
She's just said, FYI, NOAA is prepping to transition to Atlas 15 and is anticipated to change the intensities of this area. And she said that info was conveyed from Sacramento NWS, so National Weather Service. And then Jeffrey had another comment. It would be nice to have a way to specify underground cisterns and infiltration chambers. I guess that was more for.
And I think that's what I was discussing with the underground chambers. I've heard that there is discussion between the city and the water board that they're working on a typical detail that wouldn't have to get approved through the water board on an individual case. I don't know how far along that process is.
I think this is a good one to pocket for the Q&A with the regional board. Because they're going to be in the hot seat for sure. But these are great things to throw at them for consideration.
Is he going? Okay. My name is Trevor Larson. I work with BC. My question about the printing or wish list is, you can default it to, I think, Windows to PDF. It might help the PDF issues that you're having, Zach. And then also, when you go to print a full document, it goes one by one through the individual sheets versus compiling all the sheets for you into one document. That might be nice to have.
Press the button.
Just touch it, okay. Pete Lescure Engineers, Principal. Amongst my many issues and questions with this whole circus is inconsistent application of the standards at the city of Santa Rosa. That La Quinta Hotel along 101 there, just across from the marketplace, I was allowed to use, I'll call Tinker Toys or the plastic cubicles for the storage under the parking lot. So I ventured forth on the next project, a project on Mercury Way, just to the east of the Kaiser facility. Had my engineer design it using the same product. Brought it to the city. And the engineer said, oh, you can't use that. We don't allow that. I said, well, I need to modulate my language here. Why is that? We're still in the city of Santa Rosa, aren't we? Oh, no. I work on the west side. That's the east side. So that cost me $30,000 to redo the whole design. And then the product didn't get built for other reasons that the architect screwed up. But I'm just really appalled by that. The fact that we were allowed to use these plastic cubicles on La Quinta Hotel, but not on this other project over on the west side of the freeway.
So Pete, we want to keep this to the calculator and to be relevant. I appreciate your comment. I will tell you from my experience is that La Quinta had some issues that had an approval from the regional board that was outside of our baseline from the LID manual. And so the LID manual is giving us consistency with interpretation. There are variables sometimes depending on the review you get to. I will admit that. And we do have things to address, which we're going to. But some of this is, and why we do the annual trainings, is to get you guys on board to understand where that baseline interpretation comes so that you don't end up that far down a design and then to realize that that was not allowed. And so it does happen frequently where we do allow exceptions because of certain issues in certain geographic areas in each of our municipalities. But we need to be careful about saying there's inconsistencies. The consistency here is the baseline, which is the LID manual. And certainly any one of the MS4 representatives up here, if you feel that that's not being interpreted correctly, you could bring that case forward and we can talk to the board. But generally speaking, the municipalities and the reviews in the municipalities have that authority to interpret what's going on. And we've learned a lot, and you're going to hear in a couple presentations here, we've learned a lot of things that we've done in the manual that have not been right. In some cases, the cart has been before the horse. But that's why we want to do these annual trainings, is to hear from you guys. We want to hear those frustrations, and then we want to iron those frustrations out.
So my point wasn't the inconsistent application. It was having to do with where and how can we use storage chambers, okay?
And that's a great one. And so I would say pocket that for a second, and let's wait until we get to the Q&A with the board, because I think that's a really great question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, guys.
All right, with that said, that's going to conclude the first section here. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break, and we will come back at all right, well, we're going to start you off with a question. Oh, do you have something, Kevin, already? I didn't even start.
I know. I'm sorry. So real quick, this is Stefan. Will there be any updates to the user interface for the LID calculator, or will that remain relatively unchanged?
Well, so that's why we want to encourage you to participate in kind of the design or concept or those initial planning meetings for that calculator, because if there's updates needed, then we want to hear from you, right? If a calculation is been updated or is no longer as relevant and we need to add those into the calculator, those are things that we want to hear from the design community. So the intent would be to update those, Kevin, if there was need for it. Yeah. So I do want to remind everybody that to speak into a mic when you ask a question, if you can't hear yourself in here, the people online probably can't hear you as clearly either. So it's just a reminder, and we're trying to capture all of it. And again, it's going to help us out going forward as well. And these recordings will be online after the training if you guys want to go back and refer to them yourselves. So I'm going to start off with a quick question. It's an easy question, so everybody should jump in because there's some really cool swag under this podium. But what's the typical minimum height of a high flow bypass? 3 inches, is that what you said? Casey, are you questioning your answer? Oh man, Adobe does not get it then. Anybody else? It is not 6 inches. It's 3 inches. Who said 3 inches? I'll give it to Casey. She did say it first. I have an umbrella for you, Casey. So we do see that a lot with the high flow bypasses not being designed correctly and not allowing the ponding for the LID features. Again, the intent of LID is to infiltrate and to treat, and we do want some of that ponding depth. We don't want that to be greater than 72 hours because of vector issues. But again, it's things that we're seeing in the field. And to learn more about that, we're going to actually bring Aaron Nunez up from the city of Santa Rosa, and we're going to talk about some of the common maintenance issues that we see out in the field. You want to ask me a question? No. Did it turn green?
Oh, there we go. Is it 3 inches from finish landscape, or is it 3 inches from?
Do you have a slide on this? So
But that's come up before.
We're going to pocket that because
Okay.
we're going to have probably a picture, and if Aaron doesn't remember, I will flag Aaron so we can talk about it. But really, we want 3 inches of ponding depth, and so 3 inches of clearance is most likely what you're going to be after there. Yeah. So if you start putting cobble and stuff above that, you don't have 3 inches. Now you're taking that depth and that space away, so you're not going to have the appropriate ponding depth. So we want to see that 3-inch headspace. Some plans have it as 3 inches, some plans have it as a quarter foot, right? But again, 3 inches is what we're after.
I could see why somebody would say 6 inches, because 6 inches is probably what you design for, and then put mulch or gravel in after that to get your 3 inches. So maybe that's what they were thinking. But yeah, we always want that 3 inches.
All right. Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name's Aaron Nunez, an environmental specialist with the city of Santa Rosa. And today I'm going to talk to you about lessons learned post-installation. Just a little bit about me. I do a lot of inspections of LID features while they're being constructed, and I'll go out, rough in 50, 100%. And then my colleague Angie is here, and she does a lot of the post-construction inspections as well. And I just wanted to talk about things that we're seeing out in the field and really just kind of start that dialogue with everyone here. So post-installation troubles, and I just want to talk about some common issues and just the themes of this presentation and kind of what we're going to go through. Construction versus design, that's a big one. How do we align these two worlds, right? We have our EORs, and then
It's not. Yours on here, but on the online.
so they're not seeing this.
No, they're seeing this.
Yeah.
Do we need to make the top go away?
I'm gonna get it right, I promise. As I was saying, construction versus design and aligning those two worlds, finding long-term success and just the implications of design practices and what we're seeing and some flaws out there. Repeated deficiencies observed at final acceptance, just again, common things that we're seeing that are maybe missing the point of the intent of the manual or the design. Post-installation public perception, that's a big one. That's a whole Pandora's box, but we'll delve into that. And then I just really want to end with, again, all of these people in the room here of just how do we move forward and make this a better product. So first, one thing I'll jump into is design interpretation. I'm sure everyone here has seen this detail. It's a very common detail we've seen. Priority 2 roadside bioretentions, curb opening. I would say in Santa Rosa, at least, it's one of the more common features that we're seeing constructed. The interesting thing about this specific detail is it's actually really two details, right? We have the type A for at the low point and the type B for along a slope. And this I've seen cause some issues, specifically when a developer is out there and they have their sheets and have this detail, but not matching the correct type for what they have actually in the field. And that causes, post-installation fix, they're at final punch list and saying, hey, we're all done. That causes more money because then they have to change it. Delays in final acceptance, that costs more money. And then is it really meeting the true intent? Just right here specifically, here's one where it was a low point, type A, but it was applied to slope conditions. The slope was running that way. And there's a lot of issues with this feature specifically. Because it was running that way, they put the bypass lower because the water would run and then kind of hit that cobble. And the landscaper came through and built the sides up. So they took credit for this entire feature, but really, as you come out here during a rain event, water comes through and just directly discharges into the bypasses and not really getting any contact time. And there's really no ponding depth achieved. So we come out here and there are 18 different features, and they had to come through and reconstruct all of them to then have water come through and actually, pond throughout the entire feature and take advantage of what they're taking credit for as bioretention. So just kind of some questions to think about. Could this be avoided at the design phase? Maybe there could be a clearer indication of what type of those details you're supposed to apply per conditions of their site. Better communication maybe with the civil and the landscape architect to make sure that the landscape plans match up to what that bioretention was supposed to do and not building it up to be level with the curb there. Maybe even a landscaper training specific for LID. We've been doing a couple of those lately, and that seems to have been really well received. And we've even worked with this landscape company and worked with trainings with them to get them on board with what bioretention actually is. We talked about high flow bypasses and the elevations. That's a big one I've seen too. And we were just talking about the 3 inches. Really the whole point is for volume capture and treatment. And when the elevation of the bypass isn't correct, you're really missing the entire point of it. You lose your lack of ponding, and that's your loss of treatment. Basically, if you have that bypass drain for priority 2 features or above, and it's too low, you're just getting a direct discharge of rain right into the storm drain system. Minimal interaction, if any, with vegetation or soils, failure to get 100% treatment, failure for volume capture, don't achieve trash capture objectives as well, and higher probability of discharging the pollutants that we're trying to avoid that's the whole point of this, right? No flow attenuation. So we're gonna go through a couple different case studies. By the end, if I get you guys completely sick of looking at details and I did my job, we're gonna have a lot of details. I'm gonna inundate you with these. So this is the specific detail for this exact feature. I promise you're just gonna have to trust me. I didn't just go pick different details and then put a picture to it. This is the actual detail for this feature. And here it is. The designer called it out specifically right here for 0.2 feet or about 2.5 inches for the bypass. And to answer your question actually too, and it's actually calling it above the mulch. So there's the mulch layer specified and then calling for that. So right here, that bypass, there's a little bit of a lip. I would, not even an inch or so. And they still haven't come through and done their 2 inches of the mulch yet. So when they were coming through and finishing the mulch here, that bypass was basically the lowest point in the feature, completely missing the point of LID. Here's another one. Again, the engineer came through and specifically called out for 0.25 feet or 3 inches for the bypass there. And basically right here, this was a roadside bio, and then they put the no-mow sod mix and basically laid it level with the lip, virtually making it to where water just comes through the curb cut and then just goes straight out to the bypass. It's a really common theme that we're seeing out there. This one's really kind of funny. This one was calling for for 1/2 foot or 6 inches, and then they have the atrium grate drains, and basically put that as the lowest point in the feature. So again, completely missing the point. And then I'm just going through, it's super common. All these details that we're getting for all these different features, they're calling out for that freeboard, right? For that ponding depth. And again, aligning the world of construction and design, that's getting missed quite often out in the field when I'm out there doing inspections. And I think that's something we need to figure out and kind of connect those worlds. Again, just close out. Are you guys sick of details yet? We got a lot more. Grading issues. So this comes up a lot too when talking to developers, and they're saying, we're trying to figure this out. This is new. We haven't done a lot of bios before. We want to do a good job. We're trying to wrap our heads around it. Common configurations, it's basically a slope, 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 on the sides, flat bottom. That's your flow line, depending on the priority, high flow bypass. And you can get into the engineering part of things and I am not an engineer, you can start talking about, well, we have 60-40 mix on top, and then we have our storage depth with our structural soil and our perf pipe and all that. But if you really just simplify it, we're just creating a bowl, right? It's just a bowl. We're trying to make a depression, have water enter it, let it spread out, let it pond, let it be treated by the vegetation and soil, let it percolate into the groundwater. We're just creating a bowl, right? There we go. Thank you.
It's a bowl, it's a problem.
Yeah, I got a comment that's actually a colander, not a bowl, because that'd be a problem. Although, sadly, I have seen some fully lined bowls created where the horizontal liner goes through the bottom. So I've seen bowls out there. So here again, here's the detail. This one's got a 3-to-1 slope, flat bottom, 2 feet minimum, right? Keep going through. Here again, 4-to-1 max slope, flat bottom. And we can just keep going through details, right? We have the slopes, 2-to-1, flat bottom. Another one, 2-to-1, flat bottom, varying depth or distance for the flat bottom. 2-to-1s. We're just creating a bowl, right? You can go through all of them. And then you come out to the fields, and here is our colander. Here is our detail for our colander or for our bioretention feature. And then this is what's constructed. Ignore that. This is a great picture, but just ignore that hose that's happened to go across. Just look at the feature itself. So when you get down to ground level and look, it's the feature is built up. And this is a project where they have over 50 of these throughout a subdivision. And again, the detail is here. There it is. That's how you're supposed to construct it. But this is, again, what the finished product continually is. So I guess the idea here is that water flows, and then gravity on Earth is supposed to reverse when it gets to the curb cut and float up and then go in, and then gravity switches back. I don't know. If you have
So just coming from a maintenance perspective of a person who inherits a lot of this stuff. So I'm looking at, and I'm not sure at the angle of this picture, but it looks like the sidewalk grade is significantly higher than the road grade. So a lot of times we find totally different aspect underground. We find a main line that's in a different place from where it's supposed to be, or it's under pavement where it shouldn't be, because when they actually got out and started building, something had to be adjusted for actual. My question is, how much of this, and where is the place in the whole process of approving and then starting executing the installation and the inspections, where you catch that and say, hey, with this, you got to make some adjustments to your landscape feature installation so that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, and I don't know if you want to talk on it some more too. I know it's supposed to be a plan review, but often, if I'm being honest, it's happening in the field quite a bit too, where they just start digging it up, and there's your conflict right there. And then there's what I don't like is engineering on the fly right there, and that's a main issue too. So, do you want to talk on that too?
Yeah, I just would add that we're getting a little better, right? We've seen these conflicts. I know Santa Rosa has developed specific language now that's going to really discourage and prevent you from dealing with any of those interferences that come in there that are going to end up raising that or altering that. We are also doing more in construction inspections, so 25, 50% and final. And before, we're also out there during the pre-con. So we're talking about all of this from the time the project starts to the finish of when these LID features go in, to address those, to get in front of them, so that if we do identify a conflict, that we can get an engineered solution before it's actually implemented, and then we're dealing with that high pass.
Well, that's great. And I hope I didn't sound belligerent. I didn't.
No, you're
intend
good.
to. I was just kind of observing.
It's fantastic, and that's exactly what we want to do together, right? Because the board is conditioning us to put these in, the municipalities holding that accountable to be done as part of a development process, and you guys are installing them, but we've got to do this better together. And yeah, it's kind of this tug and pull game sometimes, and we kind of want to start moving together forward now that we're all kind of in line. It's been 15 years. It's time, right? And hopefully in this next manual, we can iron some of those out, and hopefully we can start putting in some better language that is, it's, more spec-based, that gets us to the point that we all want to be, rather than this reaction of trying to interpret a really complicated manual with a lot of reference materials.
And then just going on, just because it's really well vegetated and it looks really pretty, that doesn't mean it's actually meeting the intent as well. Here's another one where, again, vegetation's thriving, it looks really good, but when you get really close to it, same thing. It was built up to the back of the top of curb. Same thing, water isn't really going to infiltrate that feature. You're not taking advantage of what was actually taken credit for as LID. Here was one where basically the feature that was designed and supposed to be constructed is running along this parking lot all the way to about a little past that van. And here's the details calling for it, with a 2-to-1 max slope on the sides, and then 1.5 foot bottom, flat bottom. And basically this was just built to be completely level, flat, behind the curb. Really, there's no way for water to do anything except come through and go straight out into the bypass. You can see no slope. It was flattened. Oops. I thought I had an after picture, but I don't. But anyway, had to come through, completely regrade this entire feature as well. And again, the details were there. It was designed as such, and it's just connecting those two worlds and making sure that product follows through. Here's one where the grading, well, this was here during a rain event, and as you can see, the water, so the DI is really close to the elevation of the curb cut, but it should be a little higher. But as you can see, water's still flowing out and creating this localized flooding. And just, this is something maybe checking elevations as construction's being done to make sure it's going to meet the intent as well. Accurate details, I just want to talk on that really quick. What is actually constructed should match the details there. And we talked on a little bit, but there are a lot of changes that happen during the construction process when you're running into something, run to a joint trench and you have to move something, or you have to change the sizing of something, change the depth, count for something else that's changed. When that happens, as a municipality or someone inspecting it, we need those accurate details to show or reflect that change that happened, or those deviations. Here's one where this was the most recent approved detail, and they're going through punch list, and this is what they provide, saying we've constructed this, a bioretention basin, 172 square feet. It was 4 feet by 43 feet. So this kind of long, slender rectangle. And then when we're called out to go inspect it and approve it, that's what was constructed. And that doesn't look like what was on the most recent approved detail. Now, what happened was, if I were to turn the camera 180 degrees, there was another development that was happening after this development, while this one was still being constructed, and they basically ran out of room. They couldn't go that far, so they had to make it wider and deeper. But again, I come out there and inspect it, and I understand that, and we have to change things, but let's see that detail. Let's see what was done, and just to make sure that the contractor wasn't out there and just doing engineering himself and deciding, oh, I'm going to do it this way. This one, I still don't know what that pipe is for, but if it's for something, put it on detail. I want to know what that's for. That's the exact detail for this rain garden here, and then come out here and there's a pipe. And then on the other end of things, so here's a detail for a bioretention on a project. And this one is tricky because detail calls out for 18 inches minimum of planting material. You know, usually it's your 60-40 sand compost. But then also it says minimum 12 inches. So which one is it? Is it 18 or is it 12? And again, I'm no engineer by any means, and maybe it's calling out for, you know, beneath the shoulder, or the bank is supposed to be 12, but then 18 on the flat. I don't know. But the point is the contractor didn't know as well while he was constructing it. So there was like 8 or 10 of these basins throughout the project, and they varied from 1.5 feet down or to like about 3, I think was the deepest. So basically they just went through and decided, hey, if we were ever at 1.5 feet, we would just do 18 inches of the sand compost. And if we were ever above that, then we would start doing the class 2 perm beneath it. So they just kind of decide when they're gonna do the rock beneath it, depending on the depth, and just chose 18. Was that the right thing to do? I don't really know. I'm not an engineer, but again, it's just making sure that everyone's on the right page and everyone's seeing it the same. And this is just something I've noticed over time.
Hey, Aaron, just to add to this, is we inspect to plan. That's what our municipalities are doing. You guys as designers are calculating this and saying that it meets the intent of the LID. So when we see those discrepancies, you'll hear from us and we'll ask for clarification, but we really want to see this before we're being called out to finalize a project. And that's the important part here, is that there is a legal standard that you guys have to meet, if that LID, and the final LID shows us that you met that standard, and then we inspect the plans that you guys designed.
I'm going to interject here as well. We'll talk about a little of this when I discuss construction review, but I also see the discrepancies, and all I have in front of me are what's been submitted into SMARTS. So I'm really dependent on seeing these details accurately. If I see a submittal that doesn't match the detail, I have no option but to reject it and return it to you, which of course means more time, more work, more money. And I'd rather not do that. So get those last final details of any changes into the SMARTS system, and it will avoid a return where you have to correct or add more documents.
I just put this up here because this was something I really appreciated for a project where they basically have bioretention features going through the entire project. But I liked what the engineer did in that they put specific details for specific instances that they might have throughout the site. And then the developer was able to match those details per what they found. So they even had a specific detail for the same bioretention, but when the storm drain pipe started to interfere and ran alongside the bio, they gave the developer the plan for what to do to change and what to develop out there. I just really appreciated that, so I wanted to share that.
We liked that the curb cuts were on that plan too, rather than our generic detail in the manual. We like that you showed them on the plans so that they knew they needed to put 2 curb cuts, one at the front, one at the end, to get the water into that feature.
Planting locations, 50% coverage should include the flow line. That's what we're inspecting to make sure that we're getting the contact time with the vegetation. Again, we want that interaction with stormwater. We want the water to run through the vegetation planted for treatment. It decreases velocity. That obviously decreases erosion by slowing down the water. It meets trash capture of 100 microns and helps capture things. You know, you go out and see creeks and you see areas where creeks are growing thick with bulrush or cattails or things like that. And you go out after a storm and you'll see trash caught up in it. Kind of the same concept here. Uptake of pollutants with the vegetation, nutrients, pathogens, hydrocarbons. You know, the vegetation is in here along with the soil, obviously, to help treat and remove those pollutants. It's a function of surface area and contact time when it comes to vegetation and the removal of pollutants. So we increase the surface area and increase the contact time, you're increasing your removal of pollutants. So not having the plants up high, but having that in the flow line. So here's an example right here. It's well vegetated. I would say it's above 50%, but there's no vegetation within the flow line. It's essentially kind of like an infiltration trench or just a rock-lined swale. So it's kind of that aesthetic versus effectiveness here. So water comes through off of pavement and then really just runs along the cobble. And when it fills up, then it'll reach out to more extent of the feature and then go through that bypass. But for those low flows, we're really not getting any contact time with vegetation. Here's another one that was just newly constructed, and this was part of their punch list, was to have them put vegetation down in the flow line. You see the curb cut, water comes through, and then really just stays along that middle area and never really reaches. And I understand the root zone and plants do spread out, and when those plants become mature, absolutely, they're going to interact subsurface with the roots. But we want to get that vegetation directly in the water.
And for the landscape architects on that one, we want to see your details with staggered plants. We know that you guys are using a program that probably gives you uniform plants just as a conceptual idea. But what we're seeing is that the landscapers coming to install them are putting them in exactly the way the picture's drawn. So that would help us from an LID perspective.
Energy dissipators. It's often overlooked on construction. I will say this is one of the most overlooked things, and it's such an easy thing to do, to just put some cobble where you have higher energy flows, right, at curb cuts, or maybe where like a roof leader drops down or anything like that. It limits erosion, obviously, especially during high flows, limits sediment and debris discharges, and really expands the lifetime of the feature. And I'm thinking more post-construction and acceptance, and when that property owner has to now come through and then maintain that in perpetuity, and we're doing our inspections, something as simple as this just helps them out so much in the long term. Yeah, talked about that. And then, so here's an example right here where these are backyard drains in a subdivision that then flow into bioretention from the backside. It's also got curb cuts taking water from the roadway. But then this was an extremely minor storm. This was right after they were constructed, and it was like 1/10 of an inch or maybe even less, and it already was eroding away. So we had them come through and line the cobble just like that. And it's a really easy fix and goes such a long way. And I put this up here because this was on a project, and I just really appreciated that the engineer here put this specifically on the detail, calling out for the cobble to be lined 4 to 6 inches of cobble, go all the way down to the flat bottom, and I really appreciated that.
And this is probably a question for you, Nick. This is from Miguel Escobar. Can you expand on what you mean by staggered plants?
Yeah, so staggered plants, what he's talking about is you want to kind of create almost like a zigzag pattern to where the vegetation down in the lower portion, get to it. We want, so for instance here, if the vegetation, so it's up along the slopes, we want that down in the flat bottom, the deepest part, and then not necessarily in a straight line, but kind of a zigzag pattern throughout the low part. And that helps with slowing down flows, and it just helps with the vegetation as well. So yeah, the staggered part is just kind of a zigzag pattern down in the low point.
Let me add to that. So think of how water flows and getting that infiltrated. It needs to hit those plants to slow it down. So if they're in the way and they have to meander just like a creek would meander, that's what you're looking for, is creating that meandering so that it slows it down and it wants to infiltrate into those areas.
Absolutely. Thank you. Planting media. So this is kind of one that's been a thorn in my side lately, and I was asked to talk, so I put it in here so you guys have to listen. So designs with 100% treatment and volume capture that are using structural soil as the entire base, and that is allowed per our manual. No soil amendments whatsoever, right? So there's nothing on top. It's just structural soil, bottom to top for your treatment and your volume capture. Seems to be happening a lot more lately. The last handful of projects I've gone to, or there's been a handful of projects the last about year or two where this is being implemented. And just the question, hey, are we really setting ourselves up for long-term success with that approach? So we have species specifically chosen, Appendix F, right? These are great plants for bioretention, especially in our region here. And they're dying immediately. You know, I'll go out to a punch list, or, you know, they're asking for us to get finaled. And these plants haven't been in the ground for but a month and they're already dead. Some are able to survive, but you can see them starting to die off pretty darn quickly. You know, so what's the mortality of these plants? Are they going to last 2 more years? Are they going to last a hot summer, a dry hot summer? Are they going to last in a lower rain year? To me, we're really just planting in dirty rock, essentially. There's no soil amendments, there's no nutrients or anything like that for these features. And it's been a very common theme with these 100% structural soil features, these roadside features, that these plants are just dying off really quickly.
The landscapers hate them too. 'Cause you
Landscapers
can't get into
they
the
get mad
rock.
about it. Just more examples here. This vegetation was planted extremely healthy, and then I think I came out here in 2 weeks and it was already dying out. There's just nothing to it. There's nothing in the soil. So I would love to move off of that. And here's our details. One's directly from our manual right here on the right side, and it calls out treatment area, structural soil, volume capture area. It's all structural, right? And we're not having that delineation of structural on top for your storage depth and then getting more of a planting media. I would love to see that change. That would be on my wish list. I'll show this video. If it will go, maybe it won't. I hope it does. Oh, it doesn't play. Okay, anyway. So this car, I gave it away though, but this was on the news in Santa Rosa, that it fell into a sinkhole. So, and this was during, I think, that Thursday where we got like 7 or 8 inches. And this was on Bay Area News, that this car fell into a sinkhole in Santa Rosa. And there's our sinkhole right there. Now, I know everyone here knows that that's not a sinkhole. That's a bioretention feature. And I'm showing that just to show that, hey, maybe if we had some good planting media and the vegetation was growing, it would have delineated during a flood event that you shouldn't drive into that. So the car that you see there, that would be basically where that orange car is, and if we just turn to put their front wheels in the future. So anyway, that's an interesting one. Yeah, you can see the top of those on the corner, but yeah. Ground cover, soil stabilization for vegetation if it doesn't achieve 51% cover. And we're talking about 51% cover throughout the entire feature, right? So if you have, this one is really well vegetated, but there are areas along the banks where it's bare. And bioretention soil, that does not count as ground cover. So we want to see something to help with those erosion issues. So this one changed, and now you have the non-flowable mulch along the banks, and they just put it throughout the entire feature, and then the cobble-lined inlets. Same thing here. So bare soils, and then come through.
Hey, Aaron,
Mulched it up.
can you back up for a second? All mulch floats. Will you address that, please?
All mulch does float. I get told that all the time from developers when I say, hey, you need to put non-floatable mulch, such as an arbor mulch. And they go, well, all mulch floats. And I say, that is true. You're right. That's the best thing we have per our manual. Yes, it floats, but over time it will interlock better than like wood chips or things like that. So yes, all mulch does float, but arbor mulch is one of the best applications we have for ground cover. It does interlock over time. Of course, if it's completely inundated with water, we get a huge rain event. It will eventually, some of it will float, but comparative to wood chips or something like that, this is what we consider the right ground cover. Please do.
Just to emphasize the point here, I was involved in a project that had mulch, and at the time they went to terminate their general construction permit, the regional water board denied termination until the mulch was removed because it was considered floatable. So this is it's a good point in that you really have to pay attention to this detail if you don't want to have to dig all this up and replace it.
Absolutely, thank you. And it doesn't have to be 100% arbor mulch. Here was an application where they had the gravel going along the lower middle area and then arbor mulch on the side. And it worked really well. And again, after 2 years, it's completely thriving. You don't even see what's under there, but that's just showing you a different application to ground cover for a bioretention area. I'll really quickly talk about vector control. This is another thing I'm seeing. We're seeing a lot of roadside bioretention specifically, well, the rain gardens as well, where like roof leaders or backyard drains bubble up and are connected through bubble ups to then, and that outflows into the bioretention. So I just want to make a clarification here. So for outfalls or outlets, that's where we want to see the pop-up emitters, right? That's where we want to see these guys here. For a thing like a great drain, that's what we want to see where water is exiting the feature. That's a high flow bypass or something like that. So entering the feature, we want to see those pop-up emitters. And the reason why is because those pipes have standing water throughout the year, right? So we're in the dry season, but the pipe goes horizontal for some extent of its construction. So that holds water, and then there's a vector control issue. So we want to see those pop-up emitters for anything where water is entering the feature and bubbling out. So think outfalls are pop-up emitters, and then inlets are grate drains. Here's one where water comes off of this building and then bubbles up into the feature through these, but these had grate drains. So we had the developer come through and replace them because you open them, and this was in summer. You can see it's got standing water. So they came through and replaced it. Oh, you got it.
Really quickly, I wanted to say, can you offer maybe like an open grate to help the water permeate into the ground underneath that drainage feature or overflow device?
I mean, it could be perforated to some extent and be able to draw down. Certainly, I mean, I think we're open to any.
You can, but
designs.
the design engineers typically don't like to do that for a couple of reasons. One is that those clog fairly quickly and they don't work all the time. And so to get in there to maintain it is almost impossible. And then I have heard that some design engineers are worried about kind of influencing the foundation through that saturation zone. But the reason being that they typically don't put the perforations in them is because they clog.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Now moving more into kind of public perceptions and things like that. Multiple ownership. This is another one. I don't really know the best way to get around this, but I just wanted to speak on it real quickly. But there, we'll see projects coming through where it's a subdivision with multiple small scale features, but then some of them, the feature goes through multiple properties and there's no HOA or anything. It's just individual property owners. And that kind of makes it really hard on a municipality because there's multiple touch points when it comes to that maintenance part after the fact. And it becomes really time intensive. So here's just an example here where here's a bioretention feature, and over time it was altered to where these two individuals decided that's what they wanted to do with their property. We come through and send letters and work towards compliance. One person is responding to us, and here they do what we asked to get it back into compliance, but we have another person who's just not reacting to us, not responding. We've sent multiple letters and calls. So you kind of just have this zombie feature where half of it's working, half of it's not. Same thing here again. Here's the feature. And then this person decides to do this cool little Zen garden, and the other person just ignores their feature, and they put these barriers through. We work with both of them. The Zen garden person decides, hey, I'll put my plants in. We're trying to work them towards getting this bioretention back. We're not hearing from the other person. So again, we get these kind of just like half constructed bioretention features.
Hey, Aaron.
Yep.
So go back just a second. So I will tell you that this has been addressed in the 2010 manual. So you're no longer allowed to put a roadside bioretention in a subdivision without it being managed by a special tax district or an HOA, just so you all know that. But we are seeing legacy projects come through that still give us this inherited problem from the older manuals. And so as design engineers, if you have this, if there is a way to correct that, it does help with future ownership or transfer of ownership when we get new property owners.
Yeah, so again, property owners aren't properly informed on what they necessarily have. And they go, hey, can I change the plants? Can I take out the plants? Can I make a vegetable garden? We found a lot of vegetable gardens in roadside bioretention features. I wrote this and now I'm like, can I make it rock? But really, it was this person actually that was like, well, can I just make it all rock? Can I fill it in, get rid of it? Here's the one that's happening right now everywhere is, can I add a walkway through it? A lot of people are doing this. Here's the feature, the roadside feature, and what he did is came through and put a walkway to connect from where they park their car to getting across the sidewalk. This person kind of came at me pretty hot saying he's going to get a lawyer and he's not taking this walkway off. And he said an accident didn't happen, but he's afraid that something would happen. So the city and property owner, we came to settle on having that walkway, but as long as it does let water flow beneath it and go through, and it's not adding impervious surfaces to it. But we're seeing a lot of this lately. Here's another one. This project wasn't even finished. It hadn't even gone through punch list. It just got occupancy, and this individual's in here for a couple months and already started to design a walkway and put it in. We sent them an informational letter, we call them our welcome letter, saying, hey, congratulations on your property. You have LID, and describing it. We gave them owner's manuals, just talking about how to maintain their feature. Yep, Colleen has them right there. We provided those to them. Still saw modifications immediately. There's just a little blurb of part of our letter where we're saying LID features are required to remain permanently and may not be redesigned or removed. Yet still, it happens quite a bit. This person was a lot nicer, but said that someone fell and broke their teeth right here. And he said, hey, I'm going to put a walkway in. I don't care what you guys say. So they went through and put it in.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
So I will say that the reason we're seeing a lot more walkways is because we removed permeable concrete in the public right of way. The regional board did, excuse me, not we. I believe in 2022, perhaps in December. So it's no longer allowed because permeable concrete looks really great in a showroom, but doesn't function very well in the real world, and it doesn't get water into the bioretention. So right now you're seeing a lot of curb cuts with bioretentions, but to get the water in and to get it to flow, they've got to create that deep depression. And people obviously use those planter strips to get across to the sidewalk. I got you, Colleen. Perfect, thank you. But I will say that the board has offered, this is one thing we do want to address in the next manual, is to come up with a detail for walk paths across LIDs, because we now have to dig the trenches. But if you have somebody that needs to have a walkway, these are things that we can go to the board and get approval on a case-by-case basis to do. We really just want to make sure that we address the public perception of one person puts a walkway in, the other person, the whole neighborhood does, but they all do it differently. And we don't want the impervious surfaces in these LID features.
Comment from Jay Gomez. For multiple ownership, good to know that the new manual is addressing these issues. For the legacy projects, is there a plan to enforce compliance, or does the city take over the O&M?
The property owner is the one who is maintaining those features, and we have maintenance declarations specifically tied to those parcels. I know I'm out of time. This is my last slide, and I just want to end with, so now what? After what we just kind of discussed here, especially with the people we have here in this room, how do we as the LID community, and that's municipalities, engineers, developers, landscapers, how do we move forward to solve some of these issues? I know everyone here in this room, we want this to be a good finished product, but obviously we're still seeing some issues. So I just pose that question to all of you of, now what? What are things that we should do? I think this is a great forum to have those discussions and kind of think about that and share those ideas. I mean, these are just a couple of mine, but getting municipal staff to inspect with the civil, with the engineer record out on site, maybe at certain phases of the project, I think that would help a lot. Integrating all municipalities to be there for rough-in 50, 100, not to be this like overarching like inspection staff or anything like that, but to really to help the developer on and make sure that they're staying on track with what the engineer had designed in the first place. Communication, is that what you said? Yeah, absolutely. The civil provide a letter of conformance. The city of Santa Rosa has moved toward that, to where we're having the engineer come out and make sure that they're saying, hey, yes, these were designed per the manual. Contractors, just getting that culture shift to get contractors to view municipalities, to view the engineers, their civils, as a resource and not just going out there and doing engineering on the fly or anything like that. Bringing landscape architects and landscapers into the fold, I think that would help out a lot, and just getting them to understand what they're doing after these have been roughed in and built and are ready to be planted. More design take place of less design and clearer guidance. Again, getting rid of the developer engineering out in the field and having multiple details for different instances that are occurring in the site. I think that would help out a little bit. And then labeling of features. So we've constructed or designed these labels, and the city of Santa Rosa is now putting these out on features just to get the public and property owners to understand what these are, and they're not just planter strips, but they're something engineered. It's an engineered system. And taking notes on the next manual. What do we want to see? And that's all I got.
Why don't we table the question for right now? Is that okay? And then we'll come back because. Oh, that's really high, Aaron. I know you're not. Yeah. So we're going to table questions for that. So if you have questions, I'd write them down and hold on to them. And then we also brought some of our inspection tools, which we'll do maybe during the Q&A, or we just would like to show you what we're using as a municipality to make sure you're putting them in right. So maybe that'll help you going forward if you guys wanted to come out and inspect what the contractors put in as well. I'm going to introduce now Elizabeth Cargay from the town of Windsor and Michael Harrington from the city of Hillsburg. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Cargay. Is it on? Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Cargay from the town of Windsor. I run the stormwater program for Windsor. And I have here Michael Harrigan, who is from City of Healdsburg, and he's a senior environmental specialist. He's a stormwater project manager. And I also want to acknowledge Alyssa Keenan. She also helped with the idea of what we're going to present here. And what we're presenting here is trying to standardize our stormwater LID reports, or our submittals that we talked about, so that we call it kind of the SWIDLID report. Oops. There we go. Okay, so what I want to emphasize here is that this doesn't mean we're going to have changes in the submittal. It's going to be the same stuff. We're just trying to find an easier way of formatting it so that you, as the designer, can submit something to the municipality in a way that the municipality knows exactly where to find everything in an easy way. So it's easier on the writing it and easier on the reviewing it. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that would look like. Well, actually, let's talk about why we're doing some of this first. So we get a lot of incomplete submittals. Pieces are missing, trash, part of it is not included. The report is organized differently. There are so many different engineering firms and designers out there, so they're all different. So the time it takes for a reviewer to review these things is critical. Everybody wants to get them through quicker, and we want to get them done the first time instead of 3 or 4 submittals. So we really want to find a way to standardize it so that everybody puts everything in the same place. And this is, by the way, this is a draft. This is just something we want to do over the next year, and we're going to form a subcommittee. So any of you that could be interested, please, we'll have our emails at the end, and you can email us, and we'll get together and talk about how this would work, what would not work, any ideas you have, okay? So again, I was talking about the report confusion. There's missing information. We want it to be shorter review time, no emissions, and lower the time it takes to prepare and to review. So this is what we're kind of thinking of, is having 6 different sections. We'd standardize where you find everything. You'd have the section 1, which would be the very simple project information and the determination worksheet. Section 2, the design information. Section 3, the calculator, all the sheets that you have, putting them in that section. Section 4 would be your exhibits, your improvement plans, all of the those types of sheets. Section 5 would be your maintenance agreement, maintenance information. Section 6 would be a standardized owner's maintenance plan. This is kind of what we're looking at so far. This is sort of the first draft. We're actually making it into a numbered question format, and it's like a fill-in-the-blank form almost. So you'd have, it kind of matches what the checklist was in the same format, but it's put into this question. So you'd fill in the blanks, you'd fill in, check those areas that are appropriate so nothing gets missed. It's going to be numbered so you can't miss anything. And so we as the reviewer can see which sections are left blank, and we can just easily say, hey, fill in section 2.3, 2.4. And then we're also going to have certain sections you fill out for the initial submittal versus the final submittal. So again, you only have to put it in one place, just like specs. You only look for it in one place. And then we're going to have all the attachments standardized, have attachment sheets so you know exactly where to put everything, and so that there are no blanks left. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Michael. He's going to go over the different sections. But actually, first, I'm going to do the section 1, sorry. So the very first section, section 1 would be the applicant and project information, and then you'd put in your determination worksheet in that section. It would be an attachment. But it would be just, who's doing it, the applicant's name, the addresses, where's the contact information, all of that. And all projects that require LID will need to submit this report. And some of the projects that have 401 permits and things would need to submit this report. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Michael here. He's going to go over sections 2 through 5.
Let me just get this mic here. Okay. Oops, that is wrong. I'm going the wrong way here. There, sorry. There we go. Apologies. So section 2 would be the section of the standardized submittal that includes all the designer information. Okay. Sorry guys for a little. Maybe if I squat a little bit. Oh yeah, that'd probably be easier. That includes stuff like existing conditions, description of sensitive areas, existing site soils, groundwater, and proposed LID BMP features. So, in this section, existing pre-development sites should be clearly described, including impervious areas and drainage patterns. Okay. Environmentally sensitive features like creeks, wetlands, trees must be described. You must clearly document if sensitive areas are being removed, retained, or replaced. And if you're working, in like a flow area, you may need to contact other permitting agencies. You might need a 401 or 404 permit. All right. For existing site soils, they need to be described using USDA classification. You need to identify any subsurface contamination. You need to document seasonal high groundwater levels and if there's any groundwater contamination at site or adjacent to the site. For proposed LID BMP features, please include a detailed 8.5 by 11 sheet, found in Appendix E for each BMP type, covering its descriptions, advantages, limitations, key design features, and sizing. if you make any alterations to the proposed design, please include them. I know that's been touched on a couple times already. And if you're selecting a lower priority BMP, please provide a justification. As a plan reviewer, that comes up a lot where people will say they're using a priority 2 and then they don't say anything else. And here I included this from a plan I reviewed as an example of like a very good description. I'll read it. I'll read the first part here. The lower priority BMP was selected in these areas because the location of these BMPs were within 8 feet from the existing building foundation and in an area completely surrounded by newly developed impervious areas. It goes on to talk about how there was an alteration to the design. They put in a subdrain because the soils have poor infiltration rates. So yeah, and then this is an example of a description that, didn't do a very good job. What's up? Oh, I see it. Sorry. Here they just have runoff from proposed polluted areas will be collected on site. There will be a storm drain network throughout the site to direct the surface runoff from the proposed bioretention facilities. Goes on to say they used a priority 2 BMP and nothing else. So this description, it just has really, this description uses a really generic language. Just says, doesn't include any justification for a lower priority. So when I was reviewing this, I had to send it back and request some revisions. Including a table listing each LID BMP by exhibit ID, priority type. Oh, I see it. Oh, I see. I'm sorry. My bad. Including a table listing each LID BMP by exhibit ID, priority type, and BMP type provides a clear, organized reference for plan reviewers. Sure. You'll need to clearly specify the tributary area provided by each BMP and the corresponding level of treatment provided. Please list the volume of stormwater captured by each BMP. And if there is no hydro modification control requirements, please specify the required volume capture for each tributary area to meet, so we know you're meeting the requirements. And also just organizing your data into a table showing each tributary area, its corresponding BMP, and the volume capture required. And provided creates a clear and organized reference for plan reviewers. I'm not going to go too much into this. We already had a kind of a talk on this, but when you're submitting your calculator, just be sure to use the latest version found on the Santa Rosa LID website. I've reviewed a lot of plans that have used, older versions, probably just saved on their desktop. And please submit all your calculator sheets. Oftentimes, I'll just see the BMP summary page. So here's them all here. Section 4 of the standardized submittal is where you'll attach all your exhibits, plans, and geotechnical reports. The exhibits include the existing conditions exhibit, post-construction site exhibits, your post-construction BMP details, and your geotech report. And just as an aside, for both your existing conditions and post-construction exhibits, please make sure your proposed tributary areas are clear and identifiable. It's something that comes up a lot. I like it when people kind of highlight it with different colors. I have a good example going forward here. Okay. Sorry. For plan sheets, you must include a table summarizing BMP locations and site-specific details like overflow locations and capture devices. For improvement plans, you must show all the BMP elements on their respective drawing sheets, swales on grading sheets, inlets on utility sheets, plants on irrigation sheets, etc. And I pulled this from a plan I reviewed. It's from an existing conditions exhibit, and here's just an example of how I like tributary areas highlighted. It's pretty easy to read. Let's see here. Here's what a proposed stormwater LID exhibit must include. I'll have a good example on the next slide here. So, again, see how the tributary kind of pops on screen. There it has a proposed BMP with its unique identifier and corresponding dimension table, clear legend, scale bar, north arrow. And then here's just an example of a soil survey from a geotechnical report I reviewed. It's on a pretty easy to read map with different soil types and clear boundaries. And has a pretty easy to read legend. So I'm gonna give it back here to Elizabeth.
Yeah, perfect. That's okay. I don't need that.
Section 4 also states if your vegetation isn't at 50%, it will require an erosion sediment and control plan. And Section 4 is where you would put that if your vegetation doesn't reach 50% at close. Seen some confusion there.
Sure.
This is from Jeffrey. This is in regards to the template. He said, can it avoid repeating information? He says, seems that information in section 2 is repeated in calculator sheets. And he said his concern is each time we repeat information, increase the risk of errors.
Right, right. That's one of the things we're trying to do is make it so you only see it in one place. We can try. We'll definitely look at that, but what's in the calculator sheet, sometimes some people look at it and others don't look at that part. But yeah, we'll consider that for sure. Thank you. Okay, so section 5 is the maintenance information and the maintenance agreement. So this is where we would have costs, responsibilities, the agreement, and any exhibits. So the costs, we want to do a standardized table, and this is where you would have a table that you just fill in. Each line would have a BMP on it. It would have the estimated costs for maintenance, for replacement, and some total costs, and that way these costs can be used by the owner so they get an idea of what they're getting into. And it will help also the municipalities kind of get some good data on what it costs to maintain these things. The responsibility. This is going to be clearly identifying who's supposed to take care of these things. Is it the homeowner? Is it a public district? Is it a management company? So there'll be check marks, easy to identify. We'll know exactly what's going on. And just remember, if it's in a public right-of-way, like we said, it has to be someone that's trained in how to take care of these things. It cannot be just the owner taking care of it. The maintenance agreement, you would just draft it and put it in behind a divider sheet, so it's there, easy to find. You would attach the exhibits, a map that shows the new owner what they're going to have to take care of, making it really easy to identify, and the details. And I just want to stress that this is going to go to an owner, so the owner needs to be able to read these things, so making them a little more simplistic that goes into this document, that would be great. And then just, we understand that every municipality is different. So one of the things we wanted to do is create a table like this. This shows what Sonoma County does for when the declaration of covenant for maintenance has to be recorded. So this shows Sonoma County, Town of Windsor, and City of Healdsburg. We're pretty similar, but everybody's got a little different process. And so we thought in the end, we would put something together that has all the municipalities and what their process is, so you'd easily be able to know what to do. So this one shows, you draft the agreement. That's the same all the way across. We all hold on to the draft agreement until it's fully drafted and it goes into construction. And then like Town of Windsor, when it's almost done constructed, we actually send out a letter saying, hey, go get your document recorded. The other two municipalities, the agencies, actually wait till it's completed, and then they ask you to have it recorded, or they record it. So it's just a little bit different, but just to understand that. And then we thought it'd be great to do the owner's maintenance plan, do a streamlined standard maintenance plan. City of Santa Rosa created a plan that, maintenance plan for any owner. So we want to take that document and actually make it a standard so that everybody can use it for every project, and we don't have to create them individually and change it every time. So it would be these three parts of it. One would be just understanding what LID is. The second would be the schedules and for each individual type of LID feature, and then if there's any manufacturer specific information. So the first part would just, the guide part actually helps the owner understand what LID is. And they'll give it good examples of what's good and what's bad maintenance, and so they'll be able to understand that part. Then there would be different kinds of schedules, a standard one for each type. So there'd be a rain garden or a bioretention. What are all the parts you do? Because it turns out that we're all doing the same thing. The maintenance is all the same. It's take care of the trash, take care of all the sediment, clear out the curb cuts, and that make sure the plants are alive, and that you have the 50% coverage. So we can put those into standards now. We think that'd be a really good idea. And then, like I talked about, any manufacturer specific information, if there's real specific stuff that they need to know about that's not included, you'd include that also. So again, we'd have these 6 sections. It would be standardized. You'd know where to put everything. And as we move through this, what we want to do is create a subcommittee in the new year. Anybody that's interested, we'll have our emails here on the next slide, and let us know if you're interested, if you have comments, things you think we should add, any of that. We'd appreciate that. And then we'll try to get it finalized in the next year and then get it out to everyone. So everyone in all municipalities would be using the same format. And that's it. Yeah, come on up.
Morning. I have a question specific to the finalization of the LID features and with respect to the water board, the NOT process. So I currently have a project that we've tried to NOT 3 times, and although the city has written off on the LID features, you have not. So I was wondering where the disconnect is there between the city, and how can we all come together to figure out a solution to that issue?
Thank you for that question. My goal and my review for the LID finalization, it begins with a communication to each of the local jurisdictions. However, each of the jurisdictions has different expert knowledge of LID. They have different design processes. They have different submittal requirements. And so the only way I can see whether they have met all the requirements that are identified in the manual is to go through all the different submittals. And I'm really appreciative to have an idea of a standardized type of submittal. However, currently I see things very disjointed, things that are missing, perhaps that one jurisdiction isn't yet catching, that other jurisdictions are on top of. And that's why I've always included my phone number and the ability to call me. I try to include a description, a clear description of what I'm missing, rather than just saying it's not acceptable or it's missing something. So I know it's very frustrating to have returned items. I think the regional board perhaps has been more reliant upon the jurisdictional agency's reviews of LID features in the past, and so it's a new experience for you guys out there. But I am here to try and help make this more understandable, more standardized, and I would love any questions that you have. If you have a feeling that I'm not clear enough perhaps in an explanation, anything that you give me I can use then in a future explanation perhaps to another person that is submitting for NOT. So like I said, please bear with us. I am trying to make it as clear as possible in my responses. And like I said, I know it's difficult when everybody else is done and you're getting a letter that says you've been denied NOT for whatever reason. So I will continue to communicate as best I can with you. And please, don't hesitate to call me on that number that I include in my notice.
Wait, before you ask that, I think we're going to table it. And I think we can come back to this in the Q&A and we'll talk a little bit further about it. But for now, let's take a quick break and let's come back at 10:35. Yes. Nice. Bit of a teaser. We're getting to the exciting part of our training today because this is where you get to fire all of your daggers. But before we do that, we want to know when you think that the Declaration of Covenants needs to be recorded. You just heard it. You just saw a slide on it. No. The beginning of what? I saw a hand go up. What do you say? Okay, but what specifically? Yeah, so typically you guys will give us a template for what you are going to submit, but it doesn't typically get recorded till when? When is it final portion where it has to be submitted? No. This is where I think a lot of the confusion from the design community is coming in. You guys won't be able to see the cool stuff I've got under here because nobody got it right. but prior to occupancy is the right answer. And so I'm gonna let you guys kind of dig back through your manual because there's some cool stuff down here and there's some more tough questions coming your way. But really the bottom line is prior to occupancy, you have to have the maintenance of declaration or the declaration of covenants recorded.
The final draft a report for sure. The final draft with everybody with, yeah, with that information all needs to be in there, the draft, the whole thing ready to go to be recorded. But usually there's things in construction that change quite often. So we just found that if you can just wait towards the end of construction and then get it recorded, but it needs to be recorded before occupancy.
So I'm going to introduce Casey Talbot. Did I get it right? Yeah. With Adobe and Associates. And I asked Casey to come and speak today because this past year, she had a really great example of things that drive us nuts as municipalities. And I think she's probably going to tell you, but this project that she proposed to treat each trib area had a ridiculous amount of LID features. And so we wanted to highlight this because now in this last section, we want to get your brains rolling a little bit of what are things that we could ask the board for that might help improve implementing LID in our communities going forward? And what are some things that are really hard to comply with the way that they're currently regulated or mandated?
Thanks, Nick. And hopefully those daggers are not pointed at me. So I'm going to talk to you today about some design and installation challenges, specifically around a project that I did in Santa Rosa. We all know standard bioretention works well in many cases, but there's a lot of instances where they don't make sense or they just don't create a good overall design. And I think alternatives should be considered. And I know, and this is a good segue for the Q&A with the board, because I know we all shy away from alternatives because they do take a long time to get approved. But I'm going to go through why I think that they should be accepted in certain instances. So this is a small lot subdivision in Santa Rosa, Southwest Santa Rosa. It's an 18.5 acre site. There's 137 single family homes. The lot sizes range from 2,700 square feet to 8,260 square feet with an average lot size of about 3,800 square feet. As a part of the project, we were required to extend parkway. We had 2 parkway extensions through the project site. Oops, went the wrong way. So here's the site plan. On the northerly boundary, you can see Hearn, and then to the west is Dutton Meadows, just to give you an idea of where this is located. And then the crisscross configuration are the parkway extensions. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So some of the project designs are design and constraints. So the project density actually meets the minimum density required by zoning for the site. So we all know the city pushes for the upper end of density and density bonuses. And we worked really hard to get the minimum lots. So we cannot lose lots here for bioretention or anything else. There was as I mentioned, there's a North Point Parkway and Dutton Meadows extensions required through the project site. That actually resulted in a loss of 1.3 acres of developable area, meaning that these extensions were much larger than the project needed to serve the site. So you lose developable area with these 2 extensions through the site. The extension alignment created atypical lot designs that reduced the opportunity for residential development, and it created a 0.14 acre undevelopable parcel. The project actually had several variances to city standards, which included planter strips, sidewalks, parking, et cetera, to allow for the required number of lots in city streets. The site is fairly flat, and so I'm sure most engineers know with a flat site, it's really hard to consolidate bioretention areas. And the site had very expansive soils and a very low infiltration rate. So I just highlighted in yellow the 2 parkway extensions. And then you can see kind of in that magenta is the undevelopable, the undevelopable parcel, which I think on our final map was dedicated to the city. And then you can see around the intersection, the funky geometry that we have with the lots. And I will say this, this intersection and the alignment was actually in the general plan and specific plan. So we didn't come up with this. This is required by the city's general plan and specific plan. So we had to work with this and then the geometry around it. And so again, I mean, we worked really hard to get the minimum lots required for the density for the as required by the zoning. Okay. So as it relates to LID, some of the design and challenges. So I know Nick mentioned that we had a lot of bioretention areas. We had 77 bioretention areas scattered throughout the site. Most of them were roadside bioretention areas, which is obviously a huge maintenance burden for the HOA, and then the city has to inspect all these, so they hate it too. Many of the roadside bioretention areas have parking adjacent to them, and so I've got a couple pictures and some details that you'll see, which encourages people to walk through the bioretention areas to get to the sidewalk, which is also why I think Aaron mentioned most, homeowners are trying to put sidewalks through them. And then the design also creates a drop off between the parking and the bioretention areas. So it's a tripping hazard. Again, why people are trying to put sidewalks through these. So due to the variances required for the project site, most of the planter areas are only 4 feet wide, which I'll show you in the detail in a minute, but it creates the curb actually is higher than the sidewalk behind the planter. So that's not ideal. Due to the storage requirements, again, with 4 feet, you can only go so deep. And then the relation to the perforated pipe as it relates to the structural section of the street, we put in kudo cubes for storage. The roadside bioretention takes up a large percentage of the planter strips on the site, which reduces the allowable street trees. I know most landscape architects don't like to put trees in these. And then the project, the biggest thing I think for this was that the geotechnical engineer for the project required composite sheet piles on both the street side and the sidewalk side of the bioretention area for structural support due to the highly expansive soils. Huge cost. Okay. So this is our BMP map. It just gives you in blue, outlined in blue is our tributary areas. So it gives you kind of an idea of how many bioretention areas we have and how we had to break this up to drain it. Again, very flat site, so you have a lot of low spots in order to get the site to drain. There's that. And then this is our SWIP map. I just threw this in there because the bioretention areas are in green, so I figured it'd be easier. You can just see how many there are. And then this is that second page, but you can also see there's 3 bigger bioretention areas in the open space that we have. So we did try to utilize the bigger tributary areas as best we could. But obviously with a flat site, you can only get so much area to these before they get too deep where you outfall the storm drain. So, we did the best we could. But again, they're, with a small lot subdivision and squeezing in as much as we can, are we That's okay. Don't feel anything, so I think we're good, right?
It's saying it's coming.
Okay. Usually you get them after you feel it.
Yeah.
So be prepared.
Should I give it a minute or? I think we're okay. Okay. I swear every time I felt one in Windsor twice, and every time I get them after you feel them. Yeah.
I got one in Petaluma, but it was here in Santa Rosa.
Yeah.
It's moving.
Yeah, look at
It's
that.
moving. They're moving.
Oh yeah. Huh.
Check that out.
We got it.
Didn't feel anything. You just saw that. Oh.
Perfect pendulum.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a thing to be underneath.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, we're good? Okay, exciting. Oh, yes, for the people online, there was an earthquake, a very minor one, but we got an alert, so we had to take a pause. And I think the last thing I wanted to say about this that you don't see in this is all of the utility boxes that you're going to have in the planter strip here. So you have bioretention and then all the utility boxes and then driveways. So you can see where the driveways are at, the bioretention, and then everything else is filled with planter strips. So you really have limited space here. So this is the details for the site. You know, on the top is where we have just the standard bioretention, roadside bioretention, and then on the bottom left is with the kudo cubes. I think the majority of them were the kudo cubes. So I noted where you have parking, and so you can obviously see where you'd have a drop off because the top of the bioretention obviously has to match the flow line. And then with 4 feet and a 2-to-1 slope and a 2-to-1 bottom, that's where it creates the situation where the sidewalk it ends up being lower behind the planter strip than the curb. And then I also highlighted those composite sheet piles in yellow just to give you an idea. They are on both sides of the bioretention. And then I threw that in there in case anybody's interested. Probably not, but that's the composite sheet pile detail. So here are a couple pictures I just took. So this project has not been constructed yet. We have signed improvement plans, but the developer has decided not to construct the project and he's looking to sell it. So it's not been constructed, but this was just to give you an idea of, you know, what these might look like. And so it looks like these have, you know, a drive aisle or a bike lane next to them, which probably works better for these bioretention areas. But then when you put parking next to them and people are getting out of their cars, you know, it's a tripping hazard. They're stepping into them. They're walking through them because nobody's going to walk around them. Everybody walks over them. So that just gives you an idea of what these might look like, you know, all 77 of them. So, you know, does this meet the LID manual? Yes, but it's not a good overall design. You know, functionally, it just doesn't work. So, you know, and just as a summary, you know, 77 bioretention areas, you know, which is a maintenance burden for the HOA and, you know, for the city doing the inspections. The drop off, as I mentioned, between the bioretention area and the parking, the composite sheet piles and the kudo cubes being very costly, reduction in street trees, and then the curbs being higher than the sidewalk in many locations. So, you know, this project is a great alternative for an alternative LID design such as Filterra units with underground storage, especially because we have low infiltration rates in highly expansive soils here. So the Filterra units are high flow treatment units that would significantly reduce the amount of treatment required. There have been several third-party studies that have demonstrated that these types of treatment units remove more pollutants than standard bioretention. And again, this is I know infiltration is a key, but when you have low infiltration, these units really make sense, especially to consolidate design, or space. So this option was actually presented to the water board, but as I mentioned, the project was put on hold, so we didn't get any further besides just presenting this. So, you know, this is really just to think about creative ways to incorporate alternatives to standard bioretention as we continue to get limited space for LID with high density being pushed by both the developers and the cities and counties to meet housing demands and state housing requirements. So I think this is a good segue into the Q&A for the board. And if you have any questions for me, please let me know.
If you have comments, though, we want you to wait for the Q&A.
Is that a comment?
Casey, great presentation. Thank you. I would like to support and reinforce your recommendation for the Filterra trees. Okay. And I would like to ask, we were contracted several years ago by the county to monitor some Filterra installations down in the Springs area on Highway 12. Is anybody aware of that? I'm going to look that up. And who should I convey that to? Because there was some pretty positive results on that.
You can send that to me. I can distribute it. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, because I got, oh, knock it off.
So there was a 6.6 earthquake in Humboldt County. So we're okay here, but the tsunami warning is for coastal.
Oh, yeah.
That's happening right now.
And then we went back and forth, again, the La Quinta Hotel, we went back and forth with Filterra trees on that, but that was whatever. Yeah. Anyway, I'd like to support and recommend that. I think that's a good option for stuff. Thanks, Casey.
Yeah, thanks, Pete.
So, Pete, I will say that the board is open to independent research that's been done that might allow for new technologies to come in. And so if you do have that, we encourage you to share that with any of the MS4 leads. But if you want to send it to me, I'm happy to distribute that. And those are the things where the new iterations of the manuals will start to include them. And or if we feel like we need to add it in, we'll work with the regional board to get an executive officer approval to add an addendum, right? So I agree. I think we are evolving as LID is now being implemented statewide. And we do want to start adding in some of those new technologies if they're proven to work. But we also know some of these have been very well conceptualized, but not very well implemented, or they don't work very well in the field. Permeable concrete's the prime case for that. Yeah. By the way, I'm going to hang out with Kevin Booker because his phone was the first one to go off in the entire room when that happened. So I'm just going to tee this up a little bit. And Colleen, I'm going to ask you to keep me on time because I really want the Q&A with the board, but I'm going to throw some provocative things at you for FAQs that we get. All of these FAQs have been vetted with the board. We get them all the time. They're in the manual. These aren't anything that's new or trivial, but we've seen these things, the lines blurred with these questions throughout the tenure of the LID manual. And so I'm going to throw these out, and I'm just really going to start to get that so you guys can start thinking about questions for the board. Heaven's going to help me out with this. She's online. And so Heaven, hopefully you're unmuted, but I like to call this the FAQ section, and it's everything you did not want to know.
I'm here, Nick. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Santa Rosa has stopped shaking, so that's a good sign.
I'm not sure if we can control her mic.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to drop off, but I just want to make sure it was working.
Yep. So we'll let you start with that first question if you want to read that and then tell us the Cliff Note version of the answer. And you and I will just alternate here, Heaven.
Sure, no problem. It's like we advanced a slide.
Heaven, this is Walt. I'm going to interrupt just because you're very, very loud here in the room. Could you either step away from your mic a little bit or find a way to speak a little softer?
Oh, absolutely. I'll see if I can adjust it. Bear with me for 1 second. Okay, I'm just going to do my very best to speak softly. It's not giving me that option on Zoom. Okay, so the first FAQ we touched on a little bit earlier relates to whether Regional Water Quality Control Board can deny termination of a construction general permit project for projects where the governing agency approved the BMPs in the final LID in accordance with the plan. So this was touched on, I think, once or twice so far today. And the short answer is yes, because there is independent requirements under the construction general permit that we as a water board need to make sure are met before we terminate that CGP coverage. So CGP, that construction general permit, has requirements for LID. So we're going to be reviewing that independently, as well as, of course, what Walt touched on, which is that our first step is always to coordinate with the city or county that's overseeing the project. But the reverse is not always true, whereas city has accepted the LID does not necessarily mean that in all instances the water board would approve it.
Great, thank you, Heaven. So again, we're just going to run through these quickly. The slides are here. They'll be available after this presentation if you want to read them. But again, we're just going to spark some interest so you guys can have some ideas of what to ask or how we can all start talking and collaborating in that Q&A. So the one, I'm going to take this one. So is filter fabric allowed in LID features? And what we're talking about is horizontal laying of fabric or liner is not allowed in most features. There is one scenario where that's allowed, and that's when you have contaminated soils, right? But what we see a lot of times is the LED feature will go in, the landscaper will come and they'll put a liner, a filter fabric on top as a weed barrier. That is not allowed. And the reason being is that we do not want the fines or the microbial growth, which will then inhibit that water from infiltrating over time. So we're also starting to see as a detail on here that the structural soil, we have some engineers that like to wrap that like a taco or burrito, and that's not allowed either. You can only go vertical, you cannot go horizontal. So Heaven, I'm going to ask you this question because the sound is better maybe from this end. But can pervious pavements, concrete, or pavers be used to reduce a project site total impervious area prior to determining LID triggers and requirements?
No, and this is a common point of confusion. So the first step in the process is determining whether or not you trigger the requirements. In that step, the permeable is not considered. In the second step, as was talked about in an earlier presentation, those features can be used as runoff reduction, which can effectively reduce the size of the BMP you need to install. But it's a two-step process.
Great. So the next Q&A is, can you use plants that aren't on the approved planting list? That is a definitive no. And we see this all the time where you guys design something, landscape architect comes in late, and then they put in really pretty plants because that's what the owner wants, but they don't conform to Appendix F. That is not acceptable. Now, what I will tell you is that if there's a compelling reason to use a different plant, there is a procedure which I've outlined on the bottom of that slide that we could go to the board and either ask for a variance or get an addendum to the Appendix F to get that added in. That is going to take some additional time. So that's something that you're going to want to do on the pre-planning side, not the installation side. Yep. You know what, let's hold off on that for a second. Let's do it to the Q&A if that's okay. So Heaven, if utilities are placed below an LED feature, what depth of separation is required and where is the top of separation determined? Is that at the top of the LID feature grade, bioretention soil, structural soil? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, so as laid out in the manual, it's a minimum of 2 feet of separation from the bottom of the constructed LID feature to the top of the crossing utility. And that's a minimum because in some instances, in either some cities or with certain utilities, it may need to be greater, or those cross interactions may actually be prohibited. So 2 foot minimum from the bottom of the feature to the top of the trench below.
All right, so the next one for you is, are bubble ups or atriums allowed at the end of storm drainage pipes for LID features is what we're talking about. And the answer for this is yes, and they should be there for vector control. And we've kind of gone through this extensively, so I'm not going to stay on the slide a lot, but it is something that we see a lot with the open atriums, is that they're not providing sufficient vector control as required by the LID manual with the standing water that's in those pipes. So Heaven, do the details need to match the details in the LID manual?
No, not exactly. What we're really looking for is function. And this is a really good and important place where I'm going to echo what's been said in the room as well, which is we want to engage with the entirety of this design community to work on having features that provide all of the function that they need to provide, but that do so in a way that is achievable and maintainable and effective. So, no, they don't have to be cut and paste. They were developed as a tool, and we're looking forward to, refinement and iteration and improvement on them over time.
And I highlighted this in green on this slide because this is not adopted yet. So right now our LID manual says that you have to use the designs in the manual, but I just wanted you guys to hear that those are your baseline designs. There is going to be real life scenarios where we're going to have to take that and modify it. And the regional board is understanding of that. And so that will be coming into the next iteration of the manual to allow for a baseline to exist, but not to limit by having a design which was meant to be conceptual in the first place be the only thing that's used on your plan sets. Heaven, are you okay with that? I want to make sure I'm not speaking for you.
No, and that's correct. And, this is a point where we work together with the cities and the county and the municipalities and the designers. What we really want to avoid is, I really appreciate Aaron's presentation earlier, where we avoid changes that short circuit or undermine the intended function. And I think that we can do a better job in future iterations on laying out the criteria and moving away from the standard details as the only tool.
Sorry, the sound in here is amusing. You were fixed and then you got really loud. We'll let you know when that's resolved.
Sorry, I'm trying to.
It's not you. It's
quietly.
So how do you know if your project needs a variance and how do you request one? Well, your project is going to need a variance if you can't conform with the LID design requirements in the manual. The way that you would ask for a variance is you have to go through the governing agency where you're going to construct that project. So you cannot go right to the board. You will have to go to the municipality in your review. They will have to agree that a variance needs to be requested, and then they will request and take that forward to the board. And sometimes they will include you in the open office hours that the municipalities have with the board to review those projects if further definition is needed. I will tell you that the municipality has the first right to refuse the variance. And again, this is where sometimes the local municipality can be a little bit more stringent, but you would start a variance process through your municipal reviewer is my point. So Heaven, when's an approval required for an offset project?
Right. So this slide does a nice job of laying this out. And it leads well from the discussion you just shared. So the way that this all works is the cities and counties are your reviewing and approving agencies, and they can approve project designs that meet the LID manual requirements. This includes, as was earlier discussed, volume capture being on a site-wide basis. So we kind of call it on-site offset. That can be approved by your governing agency. So as long as it's on a site basis, your volume is met, that can be approved. Any instance though where your design is not meeting the requirements, or you're having to use offset that's off your site, or you have tributary areas that are not receiving treatment and you're proposing to offset that out either on site or off site, or if you have BMPs that are priority level 3 or lower, those projects or that project with those elements is not approvable by the city. They need to come to us for individual review and approval.
Great.
And that would be done through the office hour process.
Yeah. So the intent of the final LID letter and what's the inspection requirements and milestones. So we get a lot of consternation about this. The engineer of record goes, why do I have to do a letter? well, listen, this has been in the manual since 2010, maybe even before that. Maybe some of us municipalities have gotten lax over the years. Some of us are back in tune because we see the value of it. But the point is that the engineer of record has that oversight and that knowledge that that was constructed the way that was designed. And you'd be surprised how many times we go out with an engineer on the final end of a project and they're like, this is not what we designed. And construction processes change. We want you to be looking at these at milestones as best as you can, or as best as they'll pay for. But generally speaking, we want to see that, at those layers in that cake recipe to make sure it's constructed according to the calculations that you guys or the design engineers performed. So with that, that's all I had just to kind of spur you forward a little bit. And I want to turn it now over to kind of some question and answers with the regional board. And I've been joking all along about daggers and, putting them in the hot seat. We want to keep it respectful. But again, the point of this is how can we collaborate together and what can we do from a design community perspective, regulated municipality reviewer perspective, and a regulator perspective to all meet a common goal. And so if there's ways or ideas you have for improvements, we want to hear that. If there's questions or things that we want the board to consider, those are what I would encourage you to bring your questions around. Or if there's challenges and constraints you're seeing from a review process that maybe can be streamlined in a permit, those are things that we'd want to bring to the board in this particular time. So with that said, I'm going to sit down. I think the board should stay where they're at so they can use the mics. And Heaven is also online. We can ask her as well too. And then if there's anybody online, Kevin, that has questions, I think we can just come up and ask those, and then any one of the regional board or even the municipalities could help answer that. All right, who wants to be first? Daniel? Oh, Pete, gotcha.
There we go. Hey, in terms of process and when your name is Aaron. When Aaron was talking, I was thinking about this, but his was more at the detail stage. What I'm thinking is upfront in terms of process, design review boards and planning commissions. In my experience, they tend to focus on architectural features, but that might be a good opportunity to take up this stuff. Do you see that at the design review board at your jurisdictions? Because you don't catch it early on. Like, I mean, I could have avoided that disaster on Mercury Way if I'd had the opportunity to go in and meet with somebody at the design review stage. And
We try, but sometimes they don't. So yes, it would be the best place to start
yeah,
talking about it for sure.
catch it early before we get too deep, because we got a contract with the developer or whomever, and we go down the road too far, and then suddenly we get whipsawed, and that hurts.
And I will say that is the intent of this annual training,
Yeah.
is that we all get on the board on the same page.
Yeah.
And, as municipalities, we're not perfect. We have changeover just like a private corporation.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, sometimes those concepts change. And then keeping up the manuals is tough. You guys have our time. Admittedly, we do too, right? And
Yeah.
so every agency will have an expert, and I agree. And I think you're going to start to see more refinement as we get more clear on how to better spec what we need in the ground. And you've got these really great manuals in the beginning with the intent. I'll admit they're a bit fluffy, have a lot of pretty pictures. I'd like to get away from that. And I'd like to see a little bit more code related type language so you guys know exactly what you're designing to, which would help somebody from the review board that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that the design review stage would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's a good comment. Appreciate that.
I have a couple. Aaron's gone. I got to follow up for Aaron, but so here's one. If a resident were to pursue a PCC walkway over a roadside BMP, what would be an acceptable to allow flows to pass beneath. I think that's more for Aaron than what he was talking about, where the walkway was created through a LID feature. I can follow up with him on that.
I think ask the question, but I think we should have Heaven answer that because the would have to approve the exemption. And so if you can ask the question, we can see what the requirements for that scenario might be.
Okay, I'll say it again. So if a resident were to pursue a PCC walkway over a roadside BMP, what would be an acceptable to allow flows to pass beneath?
Okay, so hopefully I'm not.
Heaven, that's
yelling.
for you, or I guess, or you, Walt, one of you two. Oh, it's okay. Heaven, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully I'm not yelling in the room. So I'm gonna start at the beginning for a second. And
Hey,
then I
Heaven,
won't-
can you talk a little bit louder?
Oh goodness.
Sorry,
Okay.
the volume got turned really low here. You
Okay.
can talk normal.
How about now? Is this okay? Okay. All right. I will project a little bit now. I've been like whispering. Okay. So I'm going to start from the beginning for a second. And forgive me for doing that, but it helps me, I think, frame this. So everything we're talking about here today comes from the fact that, you know, we're trying to prevent discharges of waste into receiving water. And the LID component that we're talking about is the pollutants and waste that come off the completed project, right? Rooftops, roadways, driveways, right? Those are different than construction, but we've talked about there's some interconnection. So what we're looking for is that these features are, you know, properly designed, installed, functional, and in place in perpetuity to continue to do that job. So they're effectively like a permanent mitigation, right? They're meant to provide benefit in perpetuity. And we've talked a lot and we've looked at a lot of pictures, and I think we all are generally on the same page of knowing what these look like, what they feel like, and some of the common problems. And so when I come to kind of answering this question and some of the FAQs we've touched on, what I go back to from a practical standpoint is function. So whatever is put in and proposed, whether it's on an individual case-by-case evaluation or whether we're considering a change to the details either now or in the future in a revision, we're looking at preserving that functionality. So what we need to do is make sure that that stormwater that's carrying those pollutants enters that feature in a way that the feature can provide the benefit that it's intended to do without being short-circuited, filled in, or undermined in terms of that function. So that's really what I would look to is what's being proposed specifically and how does that work in the detail proposed. And then of course, there's the piece of how that interacts with other required features and elements within the city landscape, conditions of approval, standards, etc. So that's really what I go to. So that's a broad way to answer maybe a specific question, but I think that may relate to a lot of what others may want to discuss today, and where I'm really trying to focus our forward-thinking efforts here is how do we ensure the function, but do it in a way that's more achievable and that meets these competing needs.
Right, thanks, Heaven. There's another question from Dave. We are seeing preliminary stormwater LID plans using sequenced bioretention basins along sloped street frontages up to 10% street slope with only one overflow at the lowest basin. Do you have any guidance on accepting this type of layout?
So that plays right into the comment I was saying about function and competing function. So whether or not the sequence is 3 basins or 5 or could only be 1 is very much going to be a site-specific engineering evaluation. And whether a single high flow bypass at the bottom is going to be sufficient to convey the larger flood event, hydrology, hydraulics analysis level design storm, again, is going to be site specific. But I go back to the function. We need to make sure that the low flow, that 1 inch, 24-hour, 85th percentile event gets into the feature and isn't short circuiting. And we need to make sure that the flood events, those rain events that are larger, than that design storm are conveyed in a way that prevents flooding and leaves the street open for emergency access, but also doesn't do harm to that feature if they're conveying through it as opposed to bypassing it. So that, we would look for, so again, I'm going back to some of the things Aaron showed, potentially things like using the riprap thing to prevent scour, properly vegetating, considering adjacent grade and sidewalk elevations, etc. So I can't answer specifically, but I can say that the function of a in sequence BMP configuration can be very viable, as long as all of the other engineering demands are considered for that feature.
Okay, and then Heaven, real quick, on the previous question, and I don't know if it's better if this person reaches out to you directly or not, but they're asking any examples of possible methods. So this is where the walkway is crossing a BMP.
Mm-hmm.
Is it better for that person just to reach out to you, or do you want to give possible methods on how to?
I'm not sure we have a great example. We've got a few in Santa Rosa that the board has exempted or allowed us to move forward with that are more bridge and have less structural components. So we don't really want a walkway that's all cement or is going to harden through the LID feature. We want it to bridge the gap is really what we've been trying to encourage people. The other thing that we've seen that really worked in Santa Rosa, and Aaron, you might be able to speak to this too, is just wooden bridges so that when the water falls on top of that, it's going into the LID feature as much as possible. But Heaven, I don't know if you want to add to that. I mean, obviously, this is not really a road we've gone down, but we have discussed of trying to put a standard detail that would then specify that. So that's going to take some work in the next iteration of the manual to come up with some of those baseline conditions.
Yeah, so I don't think we have one size fits all answer, but I'll spend 10 more seconds on kind of some of the components that I would look for that we've considered when we've allowed these few to go in, which is, as you say, wooden bridge, for example, goes over and doesn't impede the flow within the feature. It doesn't compact the soil below. It doesn't prevent vegetation from growing beneath it. Whereas if you put a concrete pathway crossing, for example, you would be using up a component of that area for vegetation. You would likely be compacting the soil below. You potentially could be increasing your impervious surface and potentially in decreasing the footprint. Now, maybe there's some mitigation measures that could be done, that there's a concrete configuration that works. And maybe in some instances, a wooden bridge wouldn't be effective. But again, we're looking at function. How are we impacting negatively or positively the function of the feature?
Go for it. My name is Michael Vasudevan. I'm with Civil Design Consultants. This year we had a project, subdivision project that required 100% volume capture. And we ran into a situation where one of our tributary areas couldn't provide both volume and treatment. So we proposed on-site offsetting of the volume while still providing treatment within the tributary area. And we ran into a problem where what we proposed for the treatment was not adequate according to, I think, the city of Santa Rosa. It was vertical flow treatment, and in the calculator, horizontal flow treatment provides a calculation for contact time, but there is no calculation for the vertical flow. So the feedback we got was there's not enough contact time for our vertical treatment. However, there was no guidance really provided on how to provide that contact time.
That's a really good point, and I think an area of improvement within the future iteration to provide a more clear criteria for those types of features. I think that, you know, we've learned a lot, and I will say and own a very large component of this, right? There's things that we've tried over the years. I can't believe it's been 15 years that used to be standard details that have been abandoned or modified. In the early versions of these manuals, we actually did orifice control. So every single LID feature had an orifice to control peak flow to match pre-flow conditions, pre-development flow conditions. And then in this, you know, last iteration, we attempted to use permeable pavement as a conveyance, and that's hasn't proved effective, and it's been something we've had to abandon. And so I think the other piece is exactly as you say, is providing additional design criteria for some of these features, which I think we're going to need more of as we see tighter developments and more infill, where we'll need more ability to use treatment trains for achieving treatment and volume capture on sites. So I appreciate the comment and point there.
Thank you.
Hi, Heaven, it's Colleen.
Hi, Colleen.
I have a question shifting over to LID maintenance requirements and the inspections. So in the permit, there's two options related to inspections for maintenance. Either the self-certification or the municipality actually goes out and inspects. Can you speak to the site design measures? What do we call it in phase one? The credits, the runoff reduction credits, and the expectation of inspecting the credits in addition to the actual BMPs, such as the bioretention. And specifically, what I would like to know is if you have a large project and they claimed 200 trees as credits, are you looking for an inspection record that every tree was looked at every 2 years?
That's a good question, Colleen. And I think, again, the level of specificity in the current permit and manual isn't there to answer that question specifically. I'm going to sound like a broken record a little bit and go back to function. So I think that what we really are looking for is if the BMP was sized down because runoff reduction credits were claimed, right? So for example, trees or buffer strips, then the presence of those trees and those buffer strips are part of the function of that BMP now. So I would say functionally, we want to make sure that the benefit is still being provided. In terms of how we move forward on the specific documentation year over year or in that 2-year cycle, I think that's something we should think about and consider and probably improve.
Well, I've been offered an opportunity to speak about the notice of termination reviews of LID features that I perform. Like I said earlier, it is a change that perhaps some of you are not used to, having the regional board closely review these features. But I thought I'd give you a brief summary of some general problems that I typically encounter and what results in a denied or a returned request for NOT. And this is just related to LID, not related to perhaps some of the other requirements for NOT. So as I already said, the first response I'm going to have is a communication with the jurisdictional agency and make sure that they have had somebody inspecting the LID That being said, it is not a golden ticket that says, okay, the LID is perfect and I am moving forward with my review. So in these applications for NOT regarding LID, I need to be able to see that it was constructed and it's demonstrated that it was constructed according to the documents that I am looking at in the SMARTS database. That's going to include the stormwater, the final stormwater LIDs, because they provide me the landscape drawings of how many plants are supposed to be in there, where those plants are supposed to be. It's going to include the offsets or ponding depths. It's going to include the aerial size. Obviously, I won't be able to look at the depth of the installation of any structural matrix, but that I rely on each of the jurisdictional agencies to verify via their inspections. Some typical problems I encounter are photos that are submitted and they don't show all of the LIDs. They show a few of them, or they're missing one or two. I will look at those plans in detail to determine if all of them have been represented in the photographs. That's my responsibility to make sure this documentation is uploaded and available to the public should there be any questions whether these features have been installed as they were designed and are functioning as they are designed to the best of my ability via a remote viewing type of scenario. Given that, I've seen photos from afar that show the entire LID, but I can't make out via pixel resolution what type of surfacing is in the LID feature. So I need to be able to see photos that show me what is the surfacing. Is it soil? Is it mulch? Is it gravel? If it's gravel, what size of gravel is it? Are there fines in the gravel? Similarly, a photo of just a close-up of an overflow device perhaps is showing me one offset. I can't see that there's three others in that LID feature. So I need to see photos of all the features, all the inlets and outlets of the LID feature so that I can verify that there's enough volume being able to collect inside the feature and that volume is properly being retained to achieve treatment goals. Another particular problem I find is in everybody's attempt to provide that ponding depth, whether they accidentally put in too much mulch or didn't plan properly when the landscapers installed it, to provide the ponding depth, they often excavate a foot around the drain, the field drain, and they show me a 3-inch offset and they go, see, everything's good. So I'm just looking to do my duty to make sure that they are fully installed, and I need enough photos to do that. So enough photos, a high enough resolution, the functional aspects of the LID feature, inlets, outlets, whether you have cobbles or energy dissipators. If I can't see there's a side slope, I would have provided some photos, but boy, you know, Aaron's photos were in detail, and it's exactly what I often see as well, where I've seen features that are higher than the gutter flow line, and you're not going to get any water. It's going to be 100% bypass. Oh, please, you're the boss. Interject.
I was just going to add just maybe an overarching kind of framework and where this falls. So the requirement, as the water board, we're charged with water quality and with stormwater. We're implementing all of these permits, right? The municipal permits, which are issued to the cities and counties, or the Caltrans permits, the construction general permit, the industrial general permit. In this, so in almost all of these, there's some component of BMP requirements for LID, or oversight in some of these elements. Additionally, we have other areas like 401. So if your project is coming in and needing permitting because it's a particular type or it's doing dredge and fill, there may be some other triggers and thresholds. But coming back to the CGP for a second, I just want to point out that the requirement on us as water boards to sign off and look at LID implementation as part of the notice of termination process has been in place all along. What we're doing is a better job at coordinating that effort and reviewing closely what's being submitted. And as we've talked about, we're not wholly deferring that process, but rather coordinating with our cities and counties. And so that's why on the designer developer side, you're feeling more attention on that. It isn't actually a changed requirement, but rather an improved process on our side. So just for context, I wanted to share that.
And as usual, that was perfect timing because I was done.
So I got a question from Matthew. Who is responsible for creating and maintaining smarts for projects?
The state board has created and maintains and updates smarts. They also review NOI submittals for completeness, not for quality or content. So if we're unable to get documents into smarts, it's usually a state board situation or question to ask the state board. They have been extremely responsive that I've found in replying to both their email at stormwater@waterboards.ca.gov. They also do have a phone line, but you will often not be able to speak with them directly. They will return your call. So I have found that my best response has been through email, and I have never had longer delay than 1.5 days. So I think they're doing an excellent job, but there are consistently more bugs to work out. So we all know how clunky smarts can be, and it can be difficult to navigate our way through sometimes. And there are bugs that are encountered that need to be fixed. And if you find those, please send them to me. Send them also to the state board. They'll be responsible, but I can put a little bit more pressure on them that we need to correct them sooner because we're having a lot of difficulties. So you're welcome to send that to me as well.
Yeah, so, and just to clarify, everything Walt just said is absolutely correct in terms of who operates and maintains the platform of smarts and the database as it exists and its functionality. In terms of who submits on a project by project basis, that's going to be whoever is signed up as the legally responsible person, or LRP, and who they then link as users associated with that project. And each project has to have that own setup, including a wet signature and fee, and is maintained by the development team, right, by the project proponents. Also, just one other thing to note, the construction general permit and the industrial general permit, anything that goes in through smarts, it's a self-enrolling program. So we don't review and approve documentation that goes in there with the exception of COIs and NOTs. So in order to get coverage, there's requirements of what needs to be uploaded, those signatures, that designation, and those fees. But then the coverage is granted through that enrollment process. So just something to know. It's a little bit different than most of the processes you're used to with the cities and counties, and why there's this overlap, but also distinct authority between the different permits.
Great, thanks, Helen. So I just want to kind of wrap this up by giving us maybe a 5-minute overview really quick of where you see this next permit in terms of LID and what can the design community, municipal reviewers, landscape architects, what's coming our way, or what do you foresee as a future of LID?
Yeah, so I'll do my best to talk about kind of the crystal ball. As you may likely be aware of, we're here today to talk about phase 1, which is all the municipalities in the room. We also have a phase 2 municipal permit, which has LID requirements, which is our communities to the north. the northern part of our region. So a little bit of what I'm talk about is what we've seen as revised draft language for the phase 2 permit, which has gone out in the world. And we can look to that a little bit for things we can expect. So one of the biggest things is anticipating a shift in the project size trigger from 10,000 square feet of new or replaced impervious to 5,000 square feet. This permit is one of the only permits that still has a 10,000 square foot trigger. All of other permits across the state have reduced. So we can anticipate that. So again, these LID requirements being triggered on more projects. Really want to focus on what I started talking about here too, which is functionality. So I would like to take our next permit and LID manual revision to be a bit more performance and spec based, to make the implementation easier, clearer, and more straightforward for everyone involved. Definitely looking at the interaction between the LID features and the underlying storm drain infrastructure. There's direction coming from US EPA, which is where we get our authority and direction for asset management, and the importance of the underlying infrastructure conveyance systems to be functional and maintained in order for the benefit of the LID feature to be maintained in perpetuity. So I think that's an important piece. And then, generally just an interest in hearing from all of you who are here and improving those areas that can be improved so that we have less case-by-case evaluation. And so we can put something in place that's more consistent in terms of our problem or challenging areas. I think that it is likely that we will want to consider how to have multi-benefit projects and features, and finding a scale of BMPs that provides the benefit but is also less burdensome by being on every single lot. So those are some of the big pieces kind of related to this next permit. And then of course the focus on trash, which I know everyone here is aware of. We're under timelines for trash management that interplay. And LID is a really great technology, if you want to call it that, in that it deals with both non-visible and visible pollutants.
Great, thank you, Heaven. So I just want to wrap up with a few closing thoughts. You hear the triggers are going to go to 5,000 square feet. That means a lot more smaller features being put out into the world. So if you have ideas of how we can better incorporate this into our manual, please fill out your survey. You can also, if you guys don't feel comfortable giving those to the board, you can give them to any one of us permit leads, and we'd be happy to convey them without saying what company gave them to us. Because we are just as vested and interested in having a manual that works, that one, you guys can design to, two, we can regulate to, and that three, meets the water quality objectives that the board has originally intended, and the federal government's intended.
I just wanted to ask whether the surveys were available electronically for those that are remote.
Yeah, they will be. So after this training, sometime this afternoon or early tomorrow, everybody that registered will get an electronic version to submit, or you can submit it in person if you're here today. I will say that I really appreciate all of you that showed up today. It's really great to actually do these in person. The last couple of years we've done online, and although that's great and really convenient for us, it is nice to connect with the professionals. We see your stamps, we see your designs. We don't always get to interact with you, so thank you for those that came. And I hope that more come in the future, because obviously there's good things to get if you come in person. So, and you guys miss the snacks online, I'm just saying. But, you know, really do appreciate everything that you all do. We don't feel that you're bothering us. We will take the criticism. We deserve some of the criticism, but so do you. And so let's just be honest with each other. And my phone is always, I'll pick up. And if you think there's something in there that can make it better, please call. Please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do that. That's the survey. You guys have that. Again, we really want you to fill it out. If you want to be part of developing the next iteration of the manual, or you're interested in an aspect that you think you can contribute to, please fill out that last little bit on section on number 11 that says you're interested, and give us your contact information so that when that comes up in our queues, we can reach out to you and to bring you to be a part of that, which I'm hoping will include the board, the municipalities, and then people in the design review or design community, landscaping community included. So don't, just because we say design, we consider landscapers part of that design. And then, you know, the last thing I just want to say, that if designed, implemented, and maintained correctly, the LID features that you all are involved with, they're like a postcard for our communities that we all live and thrive in. And I just want you guys to see that some of this work you're doing is phenomenal, and it's amazing, and it can look good. It doesn't have to just be a feature that you had to install to get a project across the line. And I'm going to leave you with that. We're around. Feel free to come and talk to us, but thank you for what you do.
And before you go, no.
No, just please take a cookie. Please, I don't want it.
And if I could add just one last thing, I just have to thank everybody for being part of this. And I wanted to let you know, of course, as our permit is renewed, like this is not something that happens behind closed doors. There will be a public process. There will be meetings and drafts and comment periods and workshops. So there is more to come in this discussion, but please start jotting down your brilliant ideas and creative thinking and problem solving. I want to pass the red pen and come up with the best solution that we can going forward. So thank you all for engaging with us and for putting this together today.
Well, that earthquake was